Guests, ladies and gentlemen, may we have your attention? Please take your seats as conference proceedings are about to commence. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We would be grateful if you would take a few moments to listen to the following short safety announcement. On hearing the fire alarm, or in the event of an instruction, we would ask everyone to evacuate the building immediately. Staff will be on hand to assist. Please leave in a calm and orderly manner. The fire exits are located in the corners of the room. Please take a moment now to locate the exit closest to you, bearing in mind that it may be behind you. Then make your way to the assembly point at the front of the physics building, located at the car park side of the hall opposite the main building. We would ask you to remain there until instructed otherwise. Please do not attempt to re-enter the building, even if the alarms have been silenced, as this does not always mean that the emergency is over. I would also like to take this opportunity to ask you to silence all mobile phones now for the duration of the session. Thank you for your cooperation.
Guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage your host, journalist and broadcaster, Mark Simpson.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Global Innovation Summit for 2024, all thanks to the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils. I'm delighted to be your host for day 2 after Wendy did such a good job on day 1. My name is Mark Simpson. I've been a BBC journalist in Belfast for the past 30 years. 35 years ago, I was sitting where you are, doing my final exams at Queen's University. So this building, this campus, is very special to me, to my brain and also to my heart, because just outside this building I met my future wife, who was also studying at Queen's University, and now our daughter Joy is a business student here at Queen's. So Queen's has a reputation, a global reputation, as we know, for bringing people together. And almost exactly 18 months ago, I was on this stage for a celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Peace Agreement Bill Clinton was here. The then British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was here. The then Irish Prime Minister Taoiseach Leo Varadkar was here. All the politicians who put aside their differences back in 1998, those still alive, were here as well. And also was here Senator George Mitchell, who was, of course, the moderator, the man, the peacemaker, who brought us that amazing deal 26 years ago now. So it's great to be back here today to see how, once again, Queen's is bringing people together to learn from each other and to share our experiences. Day 2, like day 1, is going to be streamed live. Welcome to everybody who is watching right around the globe online. You're very welcome. The time is just after 9 o'clock here in Belfast in the morning. Thank you for joining us. Today's summit is going to focus on the importance of inclusiveness for long-term sustainability. So to kick things off, we have 2 fantastic speakers. I'd like to introduce the Queen's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sir Ian Greer, and the Honourable Deborah L. Wynne-Smith, founder and president of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, and of course president and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness. Please welcome our first 2 speakers.
Well, thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone to day 2, as Mark has said, of this fantastic summit. We had a splendid day yesterday. Indeed, we started with a truly out-of-this-world experience. And inclusion, which are essential to sustain long-term growth and development. And again, we've got some really outstanding speakers for you this morning. We've got Andy Haldane, Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Arts, but former Chief Economist at the Bank of England. We've got Ian Percy, Founder and Chief Executive of Artemis Technologies, who've got a major initiative here in Belfast. And we've got Professor Mark Lawler, Professor of Digital Health here at Queen's. So can I thank you all once again for joining us, especially after a very good dinner at the Titanic last night. And I now welcome Deborah Wynne-Smith to this podium. Deborah.
Thank you, Professor Greer. Good morning and welcome to the second day of the 2024 Global Innovation Summit that's bringing together, under the auspices of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils and our esteemed members, Queen's University and the Center for Competitiveness. We are honored that so many leaders from around the globe are with us, all committed to advancing sustainable economic competitiveness, innovation capacity, and inclusive prosperity. Allow me to thank all of you who joined us yesterday for your active participation, your intellectual contributions, your concrete recommendations and solutions to very complex challenges and unparalleled opportunities. We were greatly enriched by the mind-expanding presentation of Brian Cox, who brought to life in breathtaking imagery the beautiful, unfathomable expanse of our universe. Brian articulated the new knowledge and fundamental understanding derived from decades of curiosity-driven basic research, experimentation, and global collaboration spanning the globe. And then Daniel Hume set forth the current state of technology development and applications in the first phase of the AI revolution, also outlining the myriad science and engineering challenges that are coupled to the need for ethical and regulatory frameworks for the next phase of this most powerful of tools that are unfolding before our eyes, really at warp speed, with the projection of superintelligence on the horizon. Our distinguished speakers looked at the policy framework, groundbreaking innovations, and the need for public and private investment to drive the scale-up of the clean energy transformation, making the case that we must use all sources of energy in a sustainable way in order to provide energy abundance to all versus the status quo of today, which is energy poverty for the many. A highlight of every GFCC Global Innovation Summit is the formal release of the call to action that we co-create with our members. Yesterday, our chairman, Chad Holliday, and I released this to the world. This is an annual hallmark of the GFCC membership, our work, and our collective action to shape how leaders will address critical issues and also engage civil society. We presented 10 actionable recommendations, and we urge you to promulgate this call to action with your own government policymakers, business and academic leaders, and yes, civil society in your respective communities and nations. I was asked to share with you a few insights derived from yesterday's discussions, and I will do that. I was deeply impacted by how Brian Cox articulated and correlated the exploration and quest for understanding of the universe with the new knowledge of black hole formation that is required to advance the development and frontiers of quantum computing. He did a superb job of correlating this exploration and knowledge for why we must sustain and grow our respective investments in research, curiosity-inspired research, which constitutes the very foundation of future economic and social transformation. Yesterday, our speakers made the powerful, urgent business case for why we must work together to marshal and maximize all human talent to build innovation capacity at scale for long-term sustainable economic development, inclusive prosperity, and yes, national security. We must include all demographics everywhere on this globe into the innovation economy. This is not only a moral imperative, it is the only true driver of value creation for competitive economies, flourishing societies, and secure nations. Yet across the world, we've continued to undervalue, underdevelop, underinvest, and underutilize our most precious, irreplaceable resources and assets, namely human talent. Every human being has the potential to grow and contribute to co-creating our collective futures. Today, we will delve deeply into these critical challenges, hearing from leaders across government, industry, business, academia, and civil society. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to a very stimulating and impactful set of discussions.
Deborah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Professor Greer. I'm excited about today. Day two, I've just had a good look through at the speakers that we're going to have. Absolutely fantastic. And as I say, from all over the world, we're truly privileged that you're all here in Belfast with us. We're sorry that the weather is slightly colder than it normally is at this time of the year, but I was speaking to at least one delegate who is an all-year-round sea swimmer, and John, you have said that everyone is welcome to a sea swim with John if you've never been in the sea around Ireland before. Folks, let's get on with the business. Day two, I'm delighted to welcome Andy Haldane, Chief Executive at the Royal Society of Arts and former, wait for it, former Chief Economist at the Bank of England. Andy's going to be speaking on this topic, a programme for social cohesion and connectiveness. Please welcome Andy Haldane. Andy.
I'll resist the temptation to dance onto the stage. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ian and Deborah. Morning, everyone. Wonderful to see you all here at Queen's, which I always love visiting. Here in Belfast, which I also love visiting. A wonderful occasion at this Global Innovation Summit. And let me start with a bit of history, if I may. Because 100 years ago, people like me did not exist. And by people, I don't mean white men from England. There were plenty of white men from England 100 years ago. What that wasn't 100 years ago is any macroeconomists. So I'm an economist, I'm a macroeconomist. I look at things from the top down, try and make sense of the whole. And 100 years ago, we did not exist. What caused us to exist? What caused the discipline of macroeconomics to come into being? Well, that was caused by a couple of things, really. Two great, actually not so great things. One was the Great Crash of 1929, and the second was the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that told us that economies can break, and therefore to avoid economies breaking in future, we needed to have an aggregate, holistic view of them, to measure the economy appropriately, and then to manage the economy appropriately, to try and avoid the pitfalls of the Great Crash and the Great Depression. And here we are, 100 years later. Much of public discourse, much of policy discourse is about those very features. The news media is dominated by what's happening to this funny thing called GDP, a measure of how well the economy is doing, on a monthly, if not quarterly, basis. And policy discourse is dominated by what might happen to interest rates, what might happen to government spending, what sometimes goes by the name of monetary policy and fiscal policy, tools of policy that simply had no name and had no place as recently as 100 years ago. Well, today we don't, last time I looked, face either a Great Crash or a Great Depression. What we do face is a third great, not so great thing. And that is a great divide within and across our communities, nations, and economies. The whole world is riven with divisions, whether economic or political or social, operating locally, nationally, and indeed internationally. On the international front, we find ourselves, do we not, with around 100 wars being waged globally, including, of course, the awful conflicts in the Ukraine and the Levant. We find fractures and fissions in our national economies and polities, as this year's spate of elections, including the most recent ones, have demonstrated only too clearly. And those social divisions also show up at the local level within our communities. Witness the riots that took place, have taken place across parts of the UK and Ireland over the past couple of years, to say nothing of the epidemic in loneliness that we face, to say nothing of the so-called deaths of despair that we see in the US and indeed more widely. And yet, a bit like when it comes to the economy 100 years ago, we have not yet got that proper vista on our society, how it works collectively, and how best we manage it to close those divides, to nurture a sense of connection and to nurture a sense of cohesion in a way that is foundational to all that is good in society, including creativity and including innovation. On the way here, on the taxi here from my hotel to the university this morning, there was a Hemingway quote painted on the wall. That almost certainly get wrong, as it was passing quickly, the taxi. But it ran something like, creativity, like society, only flourishes when the parts fit together. And too much of our society right now does not fit together as well as it might. And that's why I think there's a pressing need, locally, nationally, internationally, for a coherent and comprehensive programme that seeks more actively to nurture and manage and measure the connectivity and cohesion in our societies. And I thought in today's talk, I'd say a little bit about how we ended up where we've ended up, a little bit about the fruits that we stand to harvest, the evidence base, which is now compelling on the importance of social capital, social cohesion, and social connectivity for many of the good things in life. And then conclude speculatively with some reflections on what the contours of such a programme or framework for building social cohesion might look like. And where better to have that conversation than here in Belfast, a city that, as everyone knows, has faced its challenges when it comes to social divides, but equally has sought to step up to those challenges and investing big to close them over time. So first of all, where are we and how did we get here? Well, you're probably here, not least at this conference, I imagine. Much talk at the moment of so-called de-globalization. And it's certainly true that we have gone through, since the Second World War, a halcyon period, a golden period of a deepening of flows of goods and services, people and money across borders that has no historical precedent. It's also true that over the course of this century, the 21st century, we have seen something of a levelling off in the pace of that deepening of flows of goods and services, people and money. A flattening off, but not a retreat, or at least not yet a retreat in the flows of those things across borders. That has, by its nature, then led to a much more diverse economy and society than we've probably ever seen previously. Diversity culturally, socioeconomically, ethnically, religiously, generationally, and professionally. And we know from our history books that those very features, that very diversity, is the wellspring of creativity, innovation, and prosperity. Diversity is par excellence the enabler of mass flourishing, except when it's not. Because the truth is, diversity is something of a double-edged sword. To harvest those benefits I mentioned, creativity, innovation, prosperity, we need the different diverse moving parts, the different cohorts, to be pulling together rather than pulling apart. It needs to be cohesive, have common objectives and values, and it needs to be connected, whether physically or digitally. Without that joined-upness, without that integration of cultures and cohorts, there's a risk that diverse cultures begin to clash in a mutually antagonistic way that makes not for flourishing, but rather for fragility. And that knife-edge property, that two-way street, is not unique to human systems, to social systems. That trade-off, that knife edge, that balancing act operates every bit as much in natural ecosystems as well. You take a very rich and diverse ecosystem such as a tropical rainforest, rich, flourishing, creative, innovative, but also fragile. It only takes one antagonistic actor, let's call them humans, chopping things down, for that fragility in tropical rainforest, in rich ecosystems, to be revealed. And the self-same is true in our social systems. So if diversity of nations, of communities, is a double-edged sword, what determines which side of the knife edge we find ourselves on? Well, that takes us back to this thing called social capital. Our stock of trust, our stock of relationships, our stock of networks that exist within and between communities. It also depends on a second social, that is to say, our social infrastructure, the institutions, formal and informal, that glue us together as societies. The stronger, the higher the stock of social capital, the more robust and resilient our social infrastructures, the greater the chances that diversity is an asset rather than a liability. The greater the chances that diversity is a source of flourishing rather than fragility. Given the centrality of social capital, social cohesion, social connection, to everything economically and socially, it's quite striking then that so little attention has been paid to it, whether academically or as a matter of public policy. People like me bang on all the time about the importance of physical capital, machines, technologies, roads and rail and transport. And indeed human capital, the embedded expertise and experience in our workforce, and pay the smallest of lip service to a third capital, which is to say social capital. And the same is true on infrastructure. I bang on all the time about physical infrastructure, those roads, those rails, those bridges, and digital infrastructure, broadband and the like, and far too little about the social infrastructure that underpins our communities and societies. The football club, the green space, the youth club, the museum, the library, the things that are foundational and existential to flourishing in communities. In other words, when it comes to issues of social capital, social cohesion, and social connection, too often they have been an academic and policy orphan, and should not be so. Almost a quarter of a century ago, the Harvard social scientist Bob Putnam published what is now a famous book called Bowling Alone. Bob, in some ways, the godfather of social capital, because what Bowling Alone did was to lay out the evidence in microscopic detail of the way in which social capital and social cohesion had diluted and depreciated in the US in the period since the Second World War, looking at many dimensions: whether people voted, whether people volunteered, whether people took part in various civic activities, and found each and every one of them, and more besides, on a secularly downward path. In the period since then, over the course of the 21st century, the evidence of that depreciation of social capital, of social cohesion, both in the US and internationally, has continued to mount, to the point now that it's overwhelmingly the case that in most parts of the world there has been a notable and significant fraying of the social fabric, so defined, and a depreciation of social capital pretty much everywhere. Despite us living in the most hyper-connected communities, countries, and planet ever, many more people are finding themselves disconnected from the mains. And the evidence which I'll now survey suggests that the costs of that social disconnection, the costs of that depreciation of social capital are overwhelming, whether at the local level, individuals, the community level, or at the national level. So let me set out just one or two of the key evidence elements of that evidence base on the centrality, the foundational nature of social capital, of trust and networks and belonging to achieve flourishing individually, locally, and nationally. And let me start at the individual level. It's a fascinating longitudinal study done out of Harvard over the course of the past century, looking at generational cohorts after generational cohorts, and asking the question, what are the factors that enable an individual to rise and shine? What makes for a good life, a good quality of life? And what makes for a long life? What are the key determinants of longevity? And what are the key determinants of happiness? And it turns out from that study of thousands of individuals over a 100-year span, the single biggest factor is the quality of their relationships, their friends, families, and community. There is no better predictor of how long you live and how happily you live it than the strength of your social capital at the level of individuals. And that's true particularly when it comes to your chances of progressing, what's sometimes called social mobility. You rising from lower cohorts socioeconomically to higher cohorts socioeconomically. In many countries, the UK and the US and much of Europe, measures of generational improvement, social mobility, have been stuck for much of the period since the Second World War. Which begs the question, why? What is the single biggest determinant of someone's likelihood of progressing from poor to rich over time? A second study, recent study, just last year, from another Harvard social scientist, Raj Chetty, casts fascinating light on that very question. He uses data from an unlikely source, actually from Facebook, from Meta, to construct a very detailed map of the social network of everyone in the US, pretty much everyone that is on Facebook. And the conclusion he reaches from that research is fascinating. It is that the single biggest determinant on the likelihood of you getting on generationally, of you being socially mobile, is your social network, right? It really is the case, empirically, that who you know matters every bit, if not more, than what you know when it comes to getting on in life. And the effects are huge. So let's take a disconnected, poor kid. If you connect them, say at school or in sports, with a rich, connected kid, that boosts the lifetime income prospects of the poor kid by 20%, 20. Let me tell you, there is no intervention on the planet that can achieve that degree of generational uplift. And it comes courtesy of something as simple and straightforward and cheap as putting together those that would otherwise be prized apart in rich and poor communities. And what's true at the level of individuals is true too at the level of communities. If you go to the poorest parts of any nation and ask the people in those communities, what matters most to you? What matters most to your life and the success of your community? They all say safety, and security. That outranks jobs and skills and fancy high streets. It's all about that sense of pride and that sense of belonging. Those features, that social capital within communities, is absolutely foundational to thriving, absolutely foundational to place making. Without it, we, as inherently pro-social animals, very quickly can act in ways that are antisocial, including through crime. It is only by re-establishing those bonds of social glue that we flip people back into a pro-social mindset, which is the bedrock in turn of community flourishing. And the last point, from the individual to the local to the nation state. Bob Putnam's initial work on social capital took place in Italy. And the question he first posed is, how do I explain why different parts of Italy have grown at very different rates? And the conclusion he ended up reaching through a bunch of painstaking empirical work is that it's all about social capital. It's all about the degree of embedded trust and networks in different parts of Italy. It turns out that empirical result applies nationally, across nations, every bit as it applies within nations. There is no better predictor of a country's growth rate than its embedded degree of social capital. And again, the effects are big. Let me give you a back-of-the-envelope ready reckoner. If the UK had levels of societal trust equal to those of the Scandinavian countries, our national income, that funny thing called GDP I mentioned at the beginning, would be about £100 billion larger than it currently is, which is, I'm sure you agree, a decent chunk of change, more than 5% of national income uplift from nurturing that sense of trust, belonging, and social capital. So the individual, the local, the national, and not to forget government. Let me tell you, without trust, government cannot function. Government only exists, is licensed by the public. If the public do not trust, then government itself will be ineffective. The evidence there that's accumulated since Bob first published his work almost a quarter of a century ago is now absolutely overwhelming on the power of this funny thing called social capital to enable the mass flourishing of individuals, communities, and nation states. And yet, despite the evidence, we look around the world for programs, comprehensive programs, to nurture social capital. They are thin on the ground. Of course, there's fantastic things happening, including in this city, to close the divide, to nurture capital. But is that yet a systematic program anywhere on the planet? Not that I have been able to discern. In the US, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut sought to bring a so-called National Strategy for Social Connection Act. That so far has not made it through. As he is a Democratic senator, it's unlikely to make it through, I'd say, in the next 4 years, at least. But it's just the scale of ambition we will now need, I think, to meet this challenge of the great social divide. In my remaining 5 minutes, let me just begin to sketch some of the contours of what such a program, what such a framework might need to comprise to bring about that revolution, the like of which we saw in macroeconomics 100 years ago. The starting point for that, as arid as it sounds, needs to be measurement. measurement of social capital, social cohesion, social connections. Right now, that map is very foggy, in some cases invisible. 100 years ago, that led to a huge initiative that led to what is now called the national accounts, that means of measuring our economy, that funny thing called GDP. We have no such equivalent for our society as distinct from our economy right now. And we need one, because without measurement, we cannot manage. We cannot begin to nurture and manage upwards our social capital and connectivity unless we have a better map of the territory. And at present, largely, that map of the territory does not exist. We need observatories, national or international, to track and measure cohesion on a more systematic and comprehensive basis. Secondly, this is not, to address this is not a policy. There is no singular solution to the problem I have articulated. It is rather a filter which runs through every aspect of public policy. Governments are, generally speaking, poor at delivering on policy that cross-cuts departments, right? Departmental priorities tend to be siloed, and this is one that, by its nature, requires a cross-governmental response. Governments tend not to do joined-up writing. This requires joined-up writing and joined-up action. Those are among the most important reasons, by the way, why this area historically has been a policy orphan. We did a radical rethink from the earliest of years of access requirements to every dimension of our educational and learning system. In the US, in some states, there has been radical experimentation with effectively randomized access to schools, putting together in one place those rich and poor kids, those people from diverse and different backgrounds, and that has borne real fruit. We are a million miles away from doing something similarly elsewhere around the world on a systematic basis, despite the fact that the evidence speaks compellingly to that providing a massive uplift and leg up to the poorest kids in society, with no cost to the existing rich and connected kids in society. We need also, I think, to rethink how we go about nurturing and growing and regenerating our places. So active spatial planning went out of fashion in many parts of the world, including here in the UK, during the 50s and 60s, and badly, sorely needs to be brought back into the mainstream. There's often a debate around how much social housing should be built, because right now across the UK, too little is being built. But social isn't good enough. What we need is sociable housing. Spatial planning that actively brings together what are often balkanized and silos communities and cultures. Building in those communal spaces, building in the public realm, that it means that those from different backgrounds and cultures naturally mix in a more cohesive whole. We need to make and appreciate to a much greater degree what I earlier called our social infrastructure. Those museums, those libraries, those youth clubs, those football clubs, those parks. We know that the single best socioeconomic mixing agent in our communities are those recreational and leisure things. In the US, the best social mixing agent is the church, interestingly. In the UK, it is those recreational and leisure facilities. They are often the poor relation when it comes to investment. They're seen as being a nice to have, the icing on the cake. They are the cake. And we'll only grow the cake if we invest in that social infrastructure much more actively. There's more I could say, but in the interest of time, in my remaining 30 seconds, let me just wrap up. Without any question or shadow of a doubt, we do live in divided times. The Great Divide with which I kicked off. Not a Great Depression, but a great division. That needs the intellectual and policy revolution every bit as great as that which occasioned macroeconomics at the time of the Great Depression, viewing society as a whole and seeking ways of gluing society back together using all and every arm of public policy, including measuring society better than we have. This would be a new flavor of that funny thing called capitalism. This would be social capitalism. Capitalism puts the social, the human, front and center in the setting of each and every arm of policy. This is not capitalism with a heart. This is capitalism with a handshake and a hug, the like of which we know from the evidence is foundational to mass flourishing. I hope we in the hall and beyond the hall can begin the process of building that program, of building that framework, of gluing our communities and nations back together, from which flow the very real benefits that this conference is discussing around creativity, innovation, and prosperity. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. That's a great start to day 2, and we're going to have our first panel now. And we've got panelists from almost every corner of the globe. We've got one from New Zealand, one from America, one from South Africa, and one from here in Belfast. And leading and moderating this conversation is one of our own, Tina McKenzie, Chief Executive Officer at Staffline Recruitment, and a good friend to Queen's University here. She's going to tell you a little bit more about our panel shortly, but first of all, let me tell you who we're going to be hearing from. John Healy, Chair of the Board at Invest NI, Professor Austin Rayner from here at Queen's, Professor Damon Salesa, Vice Chancellor at Auckland University of Technology, all the way from South Africa, Dr. Ebenani Muafi, who's the Deputy Director General at the Department of Science and Innovation in South Africa, all the way from Illinois, Professor Jay Walsh, Vice President for Economic Development and Innovation at the University of Illinois. Last but by no means least, again, one of our own, Cap McCusker, President of the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry here, and also the Northern Ireland Regional Lead at PwC. Tina, over to you and our panel.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. On this, I guess, typical Northern Irish morning. It's not that typical because it's not raining, but at least it's dry out there and it's fresh, and we're all in the mood to get these economies going. I think that being an entrepreneur and working in economies, and whether you're in education, whether you're in industry, whether you're in government, I guess we all want the same thing. We want people to do better. We want our economies to do better. Why? Not because of a number on GDP, but because we want better lives for our citizens, and I guess it's why we all do what we do. So I'm really pleased to be here in Queen's this morning with such a wonderful panel, and I think Mark already introduced them, but as they're answering some questions, you might hear a little bit more about what they do, but we're talking New Zealand, South Africa, Illinois, and the States. So we've got a wonderful panel, and our very own Kat and John as well here from Northern Ireland. So I'm going to get started. So this session here is going to focus on the importance of skilling and creating opportunities for all demographics to access the innovation economy. Digital platforms are crucial for education and global job market access. Partnerships amongst industry, universities, government, and civil society organisations are fundamental to cross divides and close the gaps. These collaborations are needed to put in place frameworks to enable upskilling and participation in the new economy. Addressing the global talent shortage by providing education and training is essential for inclusion, social cohesion and competitiveness. So as AI and technology growth transform societies, ensuring everyone can participate in the innovation economy is absolutely vital for sustainable growth, but importantly, social stability. So my very first question I'm going to pass to John Healy. What does the innovation economy mean to you, John? And what are the essential elements needed to ensure everyone can access it?
Tina, thank you very much. Here in Northern Ireland, our new Economy Minister, Conor Murphy, has set out a very clear vision for the economy, and he talks about the need to provide good jobs, about improving productivity, about delivering regional balance, and then also the great challenge for all economies around sustainability. And for me, in my role at Invest&I, the Economic Development Agency for Northern Ireland, I see that innovation and entrepreneurship really is the foundation on which we can deliver against those very clearly articulated policy objectives. It really is about delivering an economy for all. In terms of, well, how do we need to go about thinking around the delivery? For me, it breaks down into three distinct pillars. First is around that access to the opportunities and importantly the resources for people to get on and deliver in terms of an innovation agenda, in terms of setting up new businesses, in terms of the entrepreneurship. Government agencies like Invest&I have got a very important role to play in terms of articulating clearly what entrepreneurship is, in terms of helping to support a very wide funnel of businesses into the innovation economy, and then very importantly to spot those companies with really great high growth potential, the potential to really create wealth in the economy, and then to support them through the various different stages of business development. Secondly, I would say it is very much around providing that ecosystem, building the ecosystem of the universities, the institutions like Queen's, where we are today, and Ulster University, along with the colleges, along with the wider business community to support entrepreneurship and innovation, and then also the local councils and enterprise agencies and organisations like Invest&I, building that entrepreneurship backbone to support the companies that will come through and develop. And then thirdly, for me, it is very much around the policy and the culture shift, looking to government to create an environment where entrepreneurship can thrive, and then also changing the cultural perspective around, it's not about getting a safe job and a job for life, but it's about actually taking some risk. It's about getting out there and having a go, and it's about supporting parts of the wider community who might not ordinarily think about setting up a business, but really to promote setting up a business as a totally viable and a good thing to do right across all different sector and segments of the economy.
And just in your role at Invest&I, I'm going to throw you just a wee follow-up question on that, because a lot of people assume innovation comes from either inside university labs or indeed comes from big businesses that have these big R&D facilities. But we do know that innovation mostly comes from small startups and small businesses. Is that something you're looking in particular to support at Invest?
Absolutely, and I was struck yesterday whenever Roberto was making his opening remarks on day one, and Roberto talked about how we needed to build the capacity in the innovation economy. In my previous roles, before taking on the chair of Invest&I, I led City here in Northern Ireland and Allstate, and they were very much about starting from no skills in the financial technology sector 25 years ago after the Good Friday Agreement, to a place today where we are a leader in the fintech and regtech. So that capacity is now there. So you need the big FDIs to help to build that capacity, and now that the skills are in the economy here, it's now an opportunity to pivot and to actually look to that innovation and entrepreneurship sector to actually drive the wealth creation in the economy here.
Yeah, I guess with the election, who knows what's going to happen with the FDI. Austin, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a couple of brief comments to complement what John's been saying is, one, if you look at the modern digital economy, a lot of the major companies, Dropbox, Google, et cetera, even Microsoft, they all started off as SMEs, individuals who launched a company that has become extraordinarily successful. So that's come from an SME kind of source, if you like. And then the second comment, and again, I just want to be brief, is InvestNI investing in Catalyst co-founders as an accelerator and investment initiative here, and I've been on that twice. And I just raise that as not so much my personal experience, but seeing that so many of the people who are on those programs are not coming from corporates or large companies. They are individuals with their own idea that they want to bring, and then that's what Catalyst and co-founders are doing is, well, how can we grow these individual ideas?
Thanks very much. Kat, over to you. How can we best define the roles of government, industry, educational institutions and civil society in enabling more equitable participation in this innovation economy?
Thanks, Tina. I mean, for me, the key thing really is about collaboration and how we all have to come together to do that. And as part of the role of the Chamber and what we've really been advocating as part of our manifesto is that need for government, businesses, education to come together and really collaborate. One of the key things we see in Northern Ireland is at the moment, and John's alluded to some of it with Minister's view on the 4 pillars of what we're doing, but we really need to be able to execute on that. We see a lot of really good positive things that have come out in the programme for government, but actually how are we going to take that from strategy into execution? And that's where it's really going to call for us all to come together and work. Particularly when we look at some of the opportunities there is around AI and what that could be bringing into government. We have an underfunded public sector at the moment. There's a real opportunity if we were to allow businesses and education to come together and work much more closely with government. We could really make Northern Ireland a centre for AI transformation. We are small enough, but we are big enough with a lot of the technology skills, as John just alluded to, that we have to really make or put ourselves on the map and be a leading region for doing that there. The entrepreneurship we have in Northern Ireland is unlike what we see in any other region. In fact, for this number of years now, there's been ourselves in the North East have been the leading entrepreneurs that have come out of anywhere in the UK is Northern Ireland and the North East. We need to capitalise on that more. And that role of collaboration, it's not easy. And it really does take a lot of that policy change to come into effect. And we need to think about how we take that role of governing much more different and really start that execution piece on it. In the conversations I have with multiple businesses across Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland, there's a real want to do better, to really be participating and delivering on those outcomes. But we really need to address that fair and equitable piece of that there. And that's not just only looking at the unemployment. Unemployment for us is very low, but we have a huge proportion of people who are economically inactive. One of the highest in the UK, in fact, we have across Northern Ireland. So we need to work together much better with educators and across our FE colleges to think, how do we get people reskilled and back into the workforce and really bring in employers to help with that. We've seen elements of that with the Sure Skills and a lot of work we've been doing on apprenticeships, but we need to find better pathways to really execute across that going forward.
And you know, when we talk economic inactivity, it feels a wee bit of a fraud to me that we say we have this low unemployment when so many people that are classed as economically inactive really do want to work. And I see Roseanne from Women in Businesses in the audience, and with especially so many women that just need more support with childcare and they want to continue in their careers.
100%. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard me talk about the need for childcare, and Roseanne's been doing an amazing job with Women in Business, and I've had the pleasure of collaborating with her on a number of initiatives. 68% of women in Northern Ireland do not get to loreturn to the workplace, and a lot of that is because of the lack of a childcare strategy and affordable childcare, compared to 98% of men get to do. So we really need to look at the equality agenda of what we're doing here. The childcare, it's great to see again on the programme for government. It is one of the top priorities with 23 million being assigned to it, but we need to see that being executed on. We really need to see that really being industrialised across the region and allowing people to get back to work. And again, it comes back to we need to be investing in STEM and AI and helping women and people from economically inactive find different pathways back into the workplace. I just saw a recent study that was done over in Bradford, really looking across that whole position of the economically inactive. And just to your point, Tina, people want to get back to work, but they're really struggling to find the pathways. So again, that need for collaboration will help them navigate that in a much better way.
So there's a super opportunity there, especially with technology and AI. Austin, I'm going to come back to you just on a question around that. So given this rapid advancement in AI and technology, don't squish your face, it's going to be a good one. So just given that rapid advancement, what new skills are the most critical for people to be able to participate in this innovation economy? And how can we equip our young learners and the career professionals for their skills to remain relevant?
Thank you. I'm squishing my face because AI is such a big kind of question. So some general comments and then I'll zoom in on some of the specifics that you're asking. When we think of AI, I think in the general public what we might tend to think about is ChatGPT and therefore this thing called large language models. And I think one of the things is to really be conscious of is that AI, and this is again partly why I squish my face, is so much more than large language models and ChatGPT. And I say that partly because I think we then potentially get a warped impression of what AI is or what it isn't based on our sort of day-to-day experience of using ChatGPT or similar technologies. So it's worth bearing in mind that AI is much broader than that. And just as one example, 2 of the Nobel Prize winners this year come from a computer science background and they made a contribution to chemistry. So again, this is not large language models, it's not ChatGPT, it's just an indication of where AI is contributing to so much in the economy. Autonomous cars is another, I think, a timely example. So we can think across the board in many, many different ways, places, etc., in which AI can apply. So then starting to move towards the skills, I think some of this is then thinking about your skills in terms of being able to contribute to AI, and I think that becomes much more the technical intellectual skills. But also your skills in terms of how you can make use of it, and that can also, innovation crosses both of those. What perspective you can have in terms of how we could use AI to do something. And that, in some senses, then comes from back to the sort of SMEs and people who want to get into jobs and careers, etc., is you may well have an idea, a really important idea, a really important problem that needs addressing. And that's, I think, a really good place to start with what is the problem, what is the need, and then where does AI fit into that? And that then leads on to thinking about the why, as I've just touched on. What's the purpose here? What we're trying to achieve? What's the problem? Where does AI fit in? And then connect into earlier comments around you will need to collaborate with people. AI doesn't stand on its own. Being able to develop a machine learning model is not a solution in itself. So you must be able to collaborate. And also being willing to take risks, and I think this is something John touched on. And one of the things, and I don't think this is just Northern Ireland, I think this is a fairly common thing, is the fear of failure. But being courageous enough to try something, and failing is good actually because you can learn from it and be so much more stronger, experienced, developed as a result of taking those risks and trying something. Again, getting a little bit more specific. Critical thinking, the ability to be able to evaluate what your AI is telling you. So much of, for example, ChatGPT, so much of what it's saying is confabulation. It is incorrect. And so to be able to take a critical perspective on these things and not just to treat what you're being told by your AI as being in some senses true or correct, the ability to be able to step back from that and evaluate it. And then also have the courage then to challenge what this is saying and to push back, if you like, in a constructive way. There's much more I could say, but why don't I pause there in the interest of time?
And do you think that, we've talked a lot about the technology and getting accessible to people. What about the whole attitude, the cultural? Because, I'll only speak on behalf of myself. And when the IT guys arrive in the office and they start talking to AI, I kind of cloud over and go back to what I know. in how I run our business. Is there something around, especially for those entrepreneurs out there that are running mature businesses, how do we get the attitude to change that, you know, AI is for everyone and this is what it means, it isn't just ChatGPT? How do we change those attitudes?
Very good question. And some of it's a sort of self-fulfilling thing is that, and this is back to the courage, the willingness to step into the unknown, and that takes courage and a willingness to take risk, because just as you touched on, you know, what we tend to do is to retreat to what we know. So when the tech people come in, they are retreating to what they know, which is tech and AI. And people who don't know tech and AI then retreat to what they don't know. And we really do need people, and this is where the collaboration and the multidisciplinary kind of attitude comes in, is the courage to be able to reach over to something we don't know and learn about it, because it's actually through the combination of these two things and the integration of different kinds of knowledge where we will really then start to be making the progress.
And I guess there's a real opportunity there with our young people who've grown up and have no fear of these things at all in the businesses. But I am going to move on now. So, Damon, you're very welcome. And your question is Vice-Chancellor of Auckland University of Technology. I gave you the difficult one. No, it's not. Your question is, how can universities and training organisations ensure the curriculum remains relevant to an ever-changing job market?
It's a great question, and it's always at the heart of universities, which are both conservative institutions in that they bring forward a tradition of learning and knowledge, but also very much in the business of producing the future. And I think that tension between the things we value as a civilization or a society or a city have to be acknowledged and brought forward into that journey, but we also recognise that the pace and change that universities are facing is dramatically different. And I think one of those tensions is quite clearly seen in the way that the core businesses of learning institutions, the learning and teaching and the research, have both really rapidly changed in the last decade and a half and have led to new measures amongst universities about what their contribution is. And that includes particularly thinking about partnership, connection, about convening partners, about innovation. What is the role there? We're no longer just in the business of producing highly skilled graduates who are job takers, but we have to be looking towards producing people who can create opportunity and jobs. And I think that hasn't typically been at the forefront. That hasn't been what we teach. It's been an outcome, but not a designed outcome of universities. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about this is that universities have this other function, which is a social cohesion and inclusion function, which has really only been about a half a century or more old. And so we've brought in people from different walks of life, and we give them not just a pour of knowledge into their heads, but a grounding in a civic commitment and a public commitment that is enduring and actually has a value which is going to become increasingly important as we face the future. That we will want trusted, reliable, critical thinking people who are not only going to have to be able to learn once, as we've just heard, but go back and learn again. And the role of the university will change in that. Rather than being a one-stop shop, there'll be in a relationship which is likely to be lifelong.
And it's interesting because you hear a lot of, especially I think in Northern Ireland, a lot of pressure on budgets for universities. And they are more than just an educational institution because they're part of the community, the fabric of the place, the history of the place. And interesting, I just happened to be looking at the annual accounts of Queen's University, and what you can see is that, I know, what a bore, eh? But what you can see is actually universities, by supporting with the KTPs and investing in spin-offs, can actually really start to self-fund some of the R&D they want to do, because they're hugely successful partnerships and they're good at it. They're good at business.
Oh, definitely, and we see here right at Queen's, we're seeing this ability to convene and connect people, but also with communities who have been underserved. So certainly at AUT, my university and others, we're seeing that the entry to the future and to a world of greater opportunity for many migrant families, colonised people, Indigenous people, has been a university. And it opens that doorway quite wide to business, economic transformation. And of course, those underserved communities are often overstocked. They have a superpower of innovation. And so it can't just be that we have this innovation sort of quantum that we let other people into. We want to be in a position where we actually change what innovation means and how we go about it. And the easiest way to do that is have different people involved in that enterprise.
That talent, that resilience, that with all of those. John, did you quickly want to come in?
Yeah, Tina, thanks very much. I also think that it's important to recognise the importance of universities as centres of excellence. You know, there are real specialties within the universities here and globally that entrepreneurs can tap into. One of the most successful programmes that we've run for entrepreneurship in Northern Ireland links into MIT. And a particular specialism there, and has had huge success in terms of really helping entrepreneurs here to understand what it means in a global context.
And it's that great thing where we understand universities as some of our most international institutions.
Yes.
They're connected to each other, so you can
Stay
close but go far.
Yeah. Well, in light of that, then I'm delighted to have Jay here all the way from Illinois. Jay, you're very welcome. What are some of the most successful examples you've seen of partnerships between educational institutions and private industry to close those skills gaps? And how can we scale these globally?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here, and it's really wonderful to be here. So I'm going to take your question and expand it a little bit. You say private industry, and I just want to make sure that that's going to include big companies, SMEs, startups, and I'm also going to lump national labs in there. They're employers, and they're also part of our educational system. And I say that from the following context. I come from a place where there are 4 major research universities in my neighborhood, 2 privates, Northwestern and University of Chicago, and 2 major publics, the University of Illinois at Chicago and University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, as well as 2 national labs. We're the only place in the country that has that consortium. The 2 national labs are Argonne National Lab, which is a multi-specialty lab, with a lot of major facilities. 2 of them are an exascale computer, one of the largest computers in the world, and the brightest X-ray source in the world. Takes great pictures, as X-rays always do. It tells you great chemistry, also tells you about structure. And then there's Fermi National Lab, which runs a number of high-energy physics programs. But one of the biggest programs they're running right now is trying to figure out why you and I are here. They're trying to figure out why, when the Big Bang happened and antimatter and matter existed, why it didn't all combine again and everything went away. Because you and I are matter, and we're here. And we don't know the answer to that. So going back to our original question of physics that we had as an So I'm surrounded by this in Chicago, and we try to pull all this together. All those groups are together in many different ways. The national labs invite us, the universities, to sit on their boards. So I sit on the Argonne board and have for the last 17 years. And a number of other universities also sit on the Fermi and Argonne Labs boards. There's also the Chicago Biomedical Consortium. There's a Chan Zuckerberg BioHub. There's a manufacturing lab called MXD, which is combining advanced manufacturing with digital. All of these plays are plays where we work together. So it's an interesting ecosystem that we have slowly developed in Chicago. And there are a variety of reasons for that, not the least of which is no sector in Chicago dominates. Every sector is less than 20%, and most of them are frankly around 10%. So you have everything from manufacturing to transportation, which is why Chicago is where it is. It's where Lake Michigan meets the Mississippi River. There's insurance. The list is long, and we have many different disciplines. We're very different than Silicon Valley. We're very different than Boston. Very different than a lot of other places in the world because we are so diverse. So getting to your question here, we have developed another system where we look at the 12 public universities. I represent the University of Illinois, which has 3 universities. There's 12 publics across the state. We are not combined in any particular way, in a governance way, but we've joined together in a consortium. And it's unique in the United States to have a consortium of relatively unrelated universities that are working together to close this skills gap. We have put together a number of programs, including a workforce education exchange. This workforce education exchange includes not only the universities, but also the 48 community colleges that are across our state, and we are working increasingly with K through 12, our kindergarten through 12th grade schools. And in fact, within the University of Illinois, we've put together a virtual high school because we've found that many of the high schools across the state of Illinois do not offer advanced classes. So we are putting together those advanced classes and allowing those to be built online so that students in rural areas and underserved urban areas can also access these advanced classes: calculus, advanced physics, advanced history, these sorts of classes. So we're working across this spectrum. We're working with large companies and small companies. We're working with communities. We're working on issues such as childcare. This is a major problem in continuing education for moms and dads as they try to figure out how to continue their education and take advantage of the community colleges and the universities and the offerings that we have. It's great for us to have offerings, but if people can't make it in evenings, which is frankly when they can make it, because they don't have childcare, or during the day because they don't have childcare, this is a problem. So we're working with them. We're also working with our transportation systems, you know, the bus systems and the train systems that we have across the state to try to be able to move people around so that they can get this continuing education. The last thing I would say is continuing education is what we're doing right now for everybody in this room. And we should be making sure that this sort of continuing education is available to the entire communities that we come from, not just those of us who are privileged enough to be paid, frankly. Most of us are probably getting paid right now for a job that we're doing, and this is part of our job. But we should also avail this to everybody in our communities.
As you were talking, I was kind of visualizing Chicago and visualizing the labs, the universities, the colleges of technology, all of that outreach, linking in the transport. And I was thinking, wow, you're so far ahead of us in terms of linking it all together, you know, and even reaching in to have that virtual high school. And when did it just happen? Did something change? Did key people get in a room, or what made it happen?
Phenomenal question. So I'm looking at a room full of leaders. The answer is for you. So when the national labs, as one example, the national labs are government-owned but contractor-operated, which means that those 17 DOE national labs, we have one lab director here, that person reports to a board. That board is not the federal government. That board is set up as a private organization.
Got it.
Okay? So at Argonne, it's run by the University of Chicago. When they were re-competing that, one of our senators said to the leadership in the University of Chicago, so one of the leaders in our country, said to the University of Chicago, I'll back that if you include the other universities. So when you're looking at building organizations and you're in a leadership position, tell the folks who want to run this, I'll back you if you include others in the neighborhood.
And you know, this place is like a tiny neighborhood. Our opportunity is it's 2 million people. It's a tiny place, you know, as Kat was saying. We can be quick to get moving on it. But thank you, Jay. Benini, you are very welcome to Northern Ireland, your first time. Are you loving it?
Yes, I'm definitely enjoying it.
You couldn't say no. All the way from Johannesburg. So you're a leader in South African innovation. So I've got a very good question for you. Let's see, digital platforms can expand global access to education and jobs, but accessibility remains uneven. What approaches do you believe will bridge the digital divide and make these tools more accessible to the underserved communities?
Thanks very much. I think I just want to start this by recording an engagement I had earlier on when somebody was asking me what the state of development in South Africa is. And my answer is, it depends on where you are in South Africa. And that is very important in the context of dealing with this kind of question, because if you find yourself in another part of South Africa, you find yourself in a place where there's everything. There's infrastructure, good connectivity, access and everything. And then you drive out for 30 or 40 minutes and you find yourself in another place which is completely different. And the reason why this is important in the context of answering this question is that we had to then look at how do we make sure that while this is a situation and you're working towards addressing the challenge, that you also improve access to existing infrastructure and facilities and also the services that do exist, for example, in terms of connectivity to others that don't have access to. And what do you actually do is also looking at some of the latest technologies around leapfrogging that you can use. For example, we don't have good connectivity, whether it is in terms of fiber, but then you can actually use mobile connectivity to really have access. So one of the things is that in terms of mobile penetration, South Africa sits, for example, at 117%, which means that almost everybody has access to a mobile phone. So that is important because it already creates infrastructure on the basis of which the playing field can somehow be leveled and you can improve access. Whether it is about using that as a platform for offering of education and so on, so you got something to build on. And the second thing is we know that this kind of access and inclusiveness will also rely a lot on the issue of access to energy. And not just access, but also affordable energy. And yes, again, in terms of that, reasonably looking at about 90% electrification, even though we had electricity problems up until recently, we now have resolved that. But you also have places where geographically it is just almost impossible to do that. And that's why we're looking at technologies such as microgrids. So you then identify communities and whether you're using solar and other sources of energy, and then you can microgrid them to have access. Now, when you have done that, you begin to then bring a lot of inclusiveness in terms of bringing a lot of people into becoming players in the economy and hence growing the economy. But you are going to need to be very deliberate on putting that into place. And then when you look at that and when you have done that, the other thing is how do you make sure that the machinery or the main players, academia, industry, and just the general public work together seamlessly towards one goal of development. That's when you then have to have programs that facilitate the movement between those three. And we have instituted a number of programs, whether it is, these are funded through government, where we support internships, where people can move around from academia to industry, from industry to academia, and from having young graduates being posted in various communities where they can actually start to assist looking at the challenges that are there. Because if you don't do that, the divide just widens. And when we're talking about artificial intelligence, and I like the fact that yesterday one of the things that was raised is that artificial intelligence is as smart as the data that it gets. Now, when you look at what artificial intelligence can do in communities like where we come from, there's going to be a need of data generation in a particular context with a particular content, so that when you have to recall things using either generative AI or other forms, you're able to have that system generate information that is relevant to people. So, for example, I always say we've got 11 official languages in South Africa, and I think in Africa we've got a whole lot of other languages. Now, if I want say ChatGPT to generate something for me in Kiswahili, it won't. because there isn't anywhere where it can pick that or where the machines can learn that and be able to generate anything. Now, we therefore need to be able to say, how do we position ourselves to make sure that digitization doesn't create the divide or doesn't actually escalate what we call the biases. It means that we need to be able to generate data that is going to empower AI to be relevant to us. So that is really where we're saying, and this doesn't only need us as Africa or as South Africa, but it also needs that the global community needs to come together and say, how do we begin to make sure that these building blocks are in place to empower these regions to be able to ensure that there is inclusiveness, because inclusiveness is going to bring about economic growth that is inclusive to the whole world. And we see that if the one part of the world is left behind, the disruption that can be caused in terms of supply chains and everything will therefore ultimately affect the whole world.
And when you hear this idea of linking up in a city, for example, the universities, the government leading, spinning it out to an independent player, linking it into R&D and startups, do you have that in Johannesburg? Is that working well between the government, industry and education?
Yeah, we've got a number of exciting programs. I mean, one of the things that we have done recently is working with universities, offices of technology transfer, to say we're funding research, we're generating a lot of IP, and in some instances, because your academics are not necessarily the business people, they generate IP, it gets shelved somewhere. So we're saying the Office of Technology Transfer need to work with the communities and open up that whole library of intellectual property so that if somebody in the community want to be an entrepreneur, want to have access and ultimately go and commercialize, then you can actually support them through various innovation funding programs and supporting of entrepreneurship. They can go there, they have access to it. And that is probably starting to work. And then we also have this whole thing of, you know, if an entrepreneur wants to have a gadget, you want to have a prototype, we've got technology stations that are based at universities where an entrepreneur can say, oh, I want to have this prototype to go and get into the market or to go and access funding. So we can also, through those tech stations, help them to really support them. So that ecosystem is beginning to gain momentum, but yes, it still needs to be upscaled.
And I guess there's the city by city, and then the world's a very small place today, that it's linking it up across, making sure that the advanced economies are supporting those that need the most help as well, in order that we all rise up together.
Yeah, so we're trying to also push that, as he said, where to say you also need to be able to adopt some of these rural communities and universities so that we don't have to leave anybody behind. So, those programs are also very important as well.
Damon, I have a question, follow-up for you on that. Benini talked about how, depending on how AI goes and innovation, it could drive existing inequalities. You know, and we hear the dangers of AI. What is it we need to be worried about with AI?
Well, I think it will reveal new inequalities as well. So many nations now which are doing relatively well, and New Zealand may well be amongst them, don't have some of the scale capacity that is needed in the AI world in particular, sort of basic compute. And then we'll see the actual digital divide, which people stopped talking about, but which didn't leave people's lives around the world, both the vertical inequalities between nations, but particularly the enclaves and the socioeconomic and ethnic differences. So we see extraordinary levels of inequality there, which will mean that the AI will exacerbate that. And where I'm from in the Pacific, we saw the thing that delivered the greatest technological uplift was the arrival of the smartphone, which didn't require such an extensive infrastructural input to deliver connectivity. But it did produce different things. It aggregated private enterprise into even fewer hands. Basically, the phone companies became the most powerful players in these environments, almost larger than governments. And so that produced a different kind of inequality and a different challenge. So I think we have to really attend to this, knowing that actually, instead of democratizing, AI could well produce the opposite and actually further concentrate influence and power.
And my final question, we've come to an end, but I am going to follow up with you, Austin. So how is that all? And it's only, you're only allowed like a couple of seconds on it. Should we be fearful then? Because if AI has this opportunity to put so much power in the hands of the few, bearing in mind what's going on around the world at the moment, should we be fearful?
Being brief, AI in itself, I don't think the things to be fearful about. In a sense, it's just as Damon's touching on, it's the human attitude that we bring to the way we use AI, and it could be used really powerfully for good, in simple terms, or it could be used to exploit. So in that sense, I don't think it's the AI in itself, it's the way that we develop it and the way we use it.
Like anything, it's the people that make the difference. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank the panel. I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's very interesting, and such knowledge and such expertise, and especially from all around the world, but also importantly from Northern Ireland as well. So thank you all very much, and thank you for listening.
Tina, thank you, and thank you to your international panel. You've definitely earned a cup of tea or coffee, and so has everyone in this room. We're going to break for about 10 minutes. If you go out the front of the Whitla Hall and turn right, immediately to your right is the South Dining Hall. There's tea, there's coffee, there are scones as well, but can you bring them back if possible, because we're going to be starting here again in 10 minutes. Thank you very much indeed.
Guests, ladies and gentlemen, may we have your attention? Please take your seats as conference proceedings are about to commence. Thank you. Guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage your host, Mark Simpson.
Hello again, everybody. Hello again. Welcome to part 2 of day 2. I hope you got tea. I hope you got coffee. I hope you got a Belfast scone. Please take your seats because we have a fantastic lineup, which will take us up to lunchtime at around 12 noonish, and we will be making our way over to the marquee on the quad at Queen's University. That's where we're going to be having our lunch. But there's lots to digest before then, including our next speaker. Ian Percy is the founder and CEO of Artemis Technologies. Ian's going to share his vision, and what a vision it is, for decarbonising the maritime industry and pioneering a zero-emissions maritime future. How on earth are we going to do that? Here's Ian Percy to tell us.
Hi everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, it's a real honour to be speaking here today. I have a few friendly faces in the room. I've had a varied background. I started off in a sporting career about 25, 30 years ago now, before turning my attention to the business and eventually ending up here in Belfast. That was me in the middle, actually, of those 5, looking a lot younger and fitter, depressingly, than I do today. But despite that, as a human being, I was probably only outputting a couple of 100 watts as I turned those handles, so you can see on the screen there. And that boat that you see in the picture was going upwards of 100 kilometers an hour, driven by the wind. That was 2017, and that was the last time I competed competitively in a competition called the America's Cup. America's Cup is very much like a Formula One for sailing. As an athlete, I had to long accept that I was irrelevant to the result, and it was the engineering that made the difference, a bit like the Formula One drivers do. And probably because of that, I started to shift over my sporting career to become, a player manager, if you would say, from football, and then a manager of the team, and got very involved in the engineering of the race boats and also obviously the running of what is about a 200-person team in America's Cup. Also in 2017, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, put their hands up and they said, we as an industry are polluting as much as aerospace, we're polluting as much as automotive. Actually, they transport most of the world's goods, and so actually it's not a bad position to be in. By mass, they're transporting far, far more than any other mode of transport, and they're actually doing it reasonably efficiently, and they're doing it by going slowly, is the bottom line. We all have visions of one horse pulling a loaded barge down a canal. It's pretty darn efficient. 1 horsepower can move a lot of coal to Birmingham. But the IMO put their hand up, and that for me in 2017, being on this boat, putting in my puny 200 watts, going at 100 kilometers an hour, was pretty clear there were some opportunities from our knowledge to do something to decarbonize. We therefore started a business with a mission. And what I would say to anyone thinking about doing that, there's not probably enough as a starting point. I inherited the race team. As I said, I had a couple of 100 people, and I remember when the billionaire owner of the team said, look, it's a great idea, you can have all the assets. And I thought, well, that's great. That's a boat that's cost us 100 million to make, but it's got a resale value of about minus 200 grand in recycling skills. And a wage bill of about $1 million a month. And it really makes me realize that starting business is so hard. And I was very privileged to be able to do that because I had the fortune of happening to be good at a random sport of sailing where you were reasonably well paid for it. And so I could take a risk and I could spend a number of years trying to make a go of it. But it certainly was an expensive few years paying that wage bill. And we got into a small business. We retracted. At one stage, we were 10 people. We're based at Cambridge University in the Maxwell Centre, which is a innovation business hub spin-off. I've had a fantastic time there. What we did have, what did we come with? I said, okay, we came with a pretty big wage bill and a worthless boat, but we also came with something that's been critically valuable to us, which is an experience in tackling problems, new problems, without any iterations beforehand. And that's a little bit the nature of our sport. Actually, differently. That's where it differs quite a lot with Formula One. Every year, Formula One, the cars, they're iterating. They look pretty much the same as the year before. There are regulatory changes from time to time, and they always make the news, but ultimately, they're innovation, not evolution. The America's Cup's traditionally been quite different to that over the years. They've suddenly thrown the full road. I mean, literally, Formula One could have to do it on a bicycle the next year. And so the rules change very quickly. They also only ever allow you to make one every 3 years of the race boat that you're going to take. So very early on, in some ways the same as aerospace for slightly different reasons, the safety reasons of aerospace, the race was won in a simulated world, a digital world, a lot more than in an iterative prototyping world. And that actually, it turned out, was really good when you had a team and a mission to decarbonize, and you had to decide what you were going to do. So we were able to use a very sophisticated physics simulation toolchain and marry it to very unsophisticated, because I was leading on this bit business models. My background before I got into sport, it was a short time at university, but it was in economics and mathematical modeling, so I had that background, which I'd long since forgotten, and the physics stuff had been where I'd been living for quite a few years. So we had this ability to tackle new problems. And I think for us, we had a mission in the decarbonizing space. And one thing with decarbonizing is it has to look at things with transformative solutions. One of the things that was really important to me from very early on, and important to our investors, was to make something that was economically sustainable. And from really early on, we started looking for this product. We had our mission, we had our team, we had our simulation tools. We started as a consulting company. We had to pay for our own lunch. That consulting company is still going today. And proudly, I think probably 30% of those wing sail projects or Flettner devices you see on ships, our consulting group have done a lot of the design work for and the routing and simulation. But we never went to make a product there because the payback on the CapEx was unreliable and it was long term. And there was a secondary reason. We saw the lowest tech solutions having the best return on investment, which we never felt was something, therefore, was going to make a sustainable impact on UK PLC, which is something that was important to us as well. So we looked around for a solution. One of the things that was said to me right from the beginning, which I've been really grateful for, and I'll come back to it later, from our investors, is do not bet on governments making change to make your business a success. Now, that was really interesting because it wasn't said from a dismissive way of government. It was just to say you'd be very arrogant to think that your particular timeline was going to sit exactly with the regulatory change of not one country, but a whole host of different countries. That's not going to happen. So you have to bring a product to market that works in today's climate. And it was that where, when we took back to this wing sail example, we're massively keen to see that adopted worldwide. It makes quite a tangible difference to emissions, more than what we're doing. But it needs regulatory change on a global scale to make it have mass adoption. And that was something that we weren't in a position to bet investors' money upon. So where are we today? We're a local-based company. We're over 200 people. We're very engineering focused. We're still at that early stage. But what did we end up making was what we call the e-foiler solution. Now, a lot of people remember hydrofoils from the 70s. They were a little, what I call a V-shaped hydrofoil. They were kind of shaped like this. That was quite good because as they went up, there was less of it in the water, so it came back down again. It was passively self-stabilizing. It had some disadvantages, though, and the primary one in the case of the decarbonizing aspect, it didn't really save much in terms of drag. The surface effects, for the engineers in the room, the surface effect of a loaded foil right at the water surface adds a huge amount of drag. So you'll see in this picture, it's very much a T, and that wing is submerged. But the problem with this is there's very, very little passive stabilization. And so the reason these were not done in the 70s is because of the complexity of control. Now, that's not strictly true, and if anyone knows of something called a Boeing jet boat, that was actually a fantastic piece of engineering for its time and was, in the same sense of this, a unstable hydrofoil, and it was low drag, and funnily enough, they're the ones still operating today in the Far East. There's a number of benefits from it. The main one, though, for me, and probably to a fault, and I'm always accused of this by our marketing team, that all I care about is that it saves money in certain cases. I just want it to come back to the numbers, and they always tell me, look, the people are glazing over when you talk, so just stop going on about the numbers and start showing them how comfortable it is, how fancy it is, and I'll come back to it later. I stand by the numbers because in my experience, we haven't sold one vessel that hasn't saved money for a customer. But it is quite cool, and the comfort side of it is really powerful to illustrate. Honestly, it's not just really good core stability from these guys on the left, for those of you who've been in the gym. So yeah, it is, as I say, ultimately a business play for us, but it's one thing that often that I agree with our marketing team is it's a business play with a prerequisite that we are decarbonizing. And that's something about being a mission-based company, is that comes before anything else, but you almost then park it and then say, how do we make it affordable for people? But it is really critical to be a decarbonizing. And to actually be a decarbonizing technology in maritime is really darn hard because unlike the one horse pulling the canal boat, when a boat goes fast, it's incredibly draggy. And any fast ferries you've been on and wondered why the ticket price is quite so high, if you take a recent customer of ours, the Isle of Wight ferry that people might have been on the south coast of England, their fuel bill every single year for one vessel taking 150 odd people back through the day is about 1.5 million sterling in costs. So you understand how many cars it takes and therefore how much pollution there is from that is a really big deal. There's some other nice benefits as well. The picture, although superimposed on a nice reef, is a real picture of the wake, and that wake reducing is great and something that just is a bit of one of those nice wins for us. And for example, here in the harbour, we're really lucky to be able to take our pilot boat demonstrator in and out at 25 knots because we don't make any wake, and all the other boats are going along very, very slowly. Now, I put this slide up not because I think there's a lot of ferry operators in the room and I'll put the product range up, but it's really to come back to one of my main points that I wanted to talk about today, which is, and I've touched on the theme, is that when we brought product to market, we wanted to find something that was sustainable financially for our customers, for ourselves, as well as being sustainable for the environment. And the short answer to it, and I mentioned it in Wing Cells, is that wasn't very easy. We looked at hydrogen a lot for domestic transportation, like that mid-range distance. We looked at alternative fuels for ships. We looked at wing sails, as I mentioned. We looked at a lot of areas and worked for other people on a lot of areas, and we did not find it to be greener and cheaper. We found it, in all those examples I've just mentioned, to be either greener or cheaper. We didn't really look at the just cheaper. That's probably the easier bit. But greener and cheaper really didn't come out very often. So if you look at this on the screen, the interesting thing is in the middle there, what we call smart mobility, but your ferry market has been great for us. We've been selling well. We go back to that Isle of Wight example. They have, you know, about $1.5 million a year in fuel. We're about 250,000 in fuel. Huge savings, more than enough, very, very quickly to pay back the capex, more than enough to pay a financier to finance those gains, and you can move on day one and everyone can be winning. Actually, the pilot boats, I mentioned them on the right too, much smaller boat, but they run all day. And in some cases, every port's different, but they run all day. And so we've sold a lot there. And with a small shout out actually to some port that will be announced in the northeast that doesn't actually have a great business case, I'll go back to my previous statement of all the sales we've made, it's come down to utterly the bottom line. We have to sell it through a service lease. No one has said, you know, we're willing to pay more because it's decarbonising. No one, with the exception of our little northeast port that we're announcing because they only have a couple of miles. But it's pretty easy in this graph to see why. If you do a lot of miles on the day, the stuff towards the right of all of these graphs, it's a really big cost saving. Even in the small boat, you can see if you're doing 200 miles a day, which is a lot. If you're doing, it's unusual a lot. You're saving millions, even in a little boat. But there is loads of maritime that does less than 150 miles a day. In fact, the vast, vast majority of small commercial maritime does less than 150 miles a day. And if we go back to the left here, crew transfer in that guise and in the UK means offshore wind crew transfer vessels. They tend to have they have a duty cycle. They go out to a wind farm that's between 5 and 50 miles offshore, then they push on against the wind farm. We don't save them much fuel then, and they come back. So pretty much exclusively below 100 miles. And because of that push on, we couldn't even do 50 miles there and back. The result is they are to the left of these graphs. Not by a lot. You can see the crossover, 150. You can imagine where the crossover is going to be on the 24-meter scale. So the offshore wind sector, in the business of making clean energy, full of people, you know, going down because the industry is struggling, but full of people with the right attitude of decarbonisation, with departments dedicated to it. So what we found is massive engagement, and when it comes to procurement, total straight talking from the ops people that are saying, we have no mandate to buy anything but the cheapest solution. And we're always honest that we're not. So this is where, for me, I think we live in a very niche world, in a small part of maritime. But the message I wanted to bring out is how important it is for this transparency, for this openness, and for policy to be driven, or we will not find. And when I love innovation summits, and I love the themes here when I see that we're looking about green growth and green tech. But one of my big concerns is, for the interest of politicians, they missell. They imagine that there's green fields out there that can mean that we all can win, win, win. And we have looked hard in one particular niche sector, don't get me wrong, one niche sector and one niche subsector. But we found a little area where we can have a win-win. And we found the vast majority of areas where we can't have a win-win. But frustratingly, we found quite a lot of areas that are about the same. And so it doesn't take much. But what it does take is engagement, domain knowledge, and strategy to direct the nudge policies or the financial fiscal policies to move these very close situations. And in other parts, of course, it probably needs to have an acceptance that we aren't going to decarbonise, that we're going to accept that it's such a hit on cost of the ticket payers or the wind energy that we're going to be, that is not worth it. I wanted to end on a positive and talk about our Belfast Maritime Consortium and why we as a company are here. I said we started in Cambridge University. That was fantastic. It was, just like Queen's, a real hub of knowledge, but it didn't have much in the way of sea access. So there was a fundamental need to move. And at the time, we were looking for support with the funding from the public sector. And one thing I believed in, and it married with the thoughts of government, was the power of consortia and clustering. That said, I must admit at first there was an element of it being contrived, knowing that was a need to raise funding. You had to touch on those buttons, but I found subsequently how true it is, and no more so here in Belfast. When we were in Cambridge, we went to quite a few different places. I'm looking at Brian, one of the first people I met here at the university. And what we found here in Belfast was a real willingness to collaborate and a real excitement about new ideas. And I thought long and hard about why we had such a positive experience here, and I have continued to do so. And I'm not qualified to comment. I haven't lived here my whole life, but what it felt like to me was a real confidence in the people from the people of Belfast to really truly lead in the world. And how did that manifest it? To me, it basically meant you weren't laughed out the room when you came with a new idea. The other thing I felt was a real eagerness for opportunity from a very, very skilled group of people. And again, there's some obvious reasons for why opportunity's been starved in this region over the last 50 years. But having come out the other side of that, why we've got this great wealth of people who don't want to leave. They don't want to leave the capital of their country, their place, in the same way you do if you're a provincial town in England or other parts of Europe. There isn't that brain drain in such a degree, and it's this real energy and excitement of taking things on. So we've really not looked back. We built a consortium here. One of the things, the power of cluster, the power of industrial strategy, therefore, because it supports clusters in a consistent way over time, and I say that pointedly because I haven't felt that to date, is place, so the regional sense of cluster. I think what I've found is, having been a traveller my whole life, what I've found is how the irrational barriers to collaboration are broken down by place. You know, where you start a business, something I did as a sportsman, maybe I'm the exception, start with such suspicion about sharing, such worry about IP leakage and commercial. You so quickly realize that most of that is irrational. Most of the time you can find win-wins, and it's so much easier to do that commercially when you share an affinity, where you have friends in common, where you live in the same place and have the same attitudes. The other thing it does is it builds up domain knowledge and skill set. And I think one of the things that I feel we probably don't value enough is that need for real genuine knowledge and domain knowledge and expertise in something. I don't know why it is in our history that we think that you just need to manage, and managing can be done without any knowledge. I think it's because probably, you know, there's parts of India that were doing all the real work and we just thought we were managing it. But it's that need for real domain knowledge that gets built up through cluster. Moving companies sometimes, moving in and out of the academic sector into the private sector, build up domain knowledge. You can't build up domain knowledge in everything. And again, it's back to why I'm encouraged by the new government in Westminster and why I really believe hard work, industrial strategy, coordination and collaboration will drive future success. Having ended a little bit too much on a political mission there, completely unqualified to have spoken on it, I'm just going to give you a final video. Just to end on our story, there's some cool images of our vessels and a little bit, I think, of my past life. So I'll leave you with that, but just thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to speaking to people. That's our simulator there. There's a digital twin centre that's been developed here in Belfast, and some of the work we do is around some of that friction modelling in low fidelity simulation. There is a bit of music that goes with this. It was a little bit like elevator music, so I don't think you're missing anything. You're seeing a bit more of this stuff. But there's the wake. You really see that difference between a boat on the wake and why it makes so much difference. And this probably is the one that most shows the difference in comfort level when you're basing yourself. Amazingly, the guy in the back of that was actually flying a drone, and they did it. So we have a number of these in build at the moment, international supply chain, but all of the key technologies are developed and built here in Belfast, but a lot of the lower skill aspects of the supply chain are built globally. A lot because it's very hard to transport such big boats, but also because we have to be honest and practical about where we have advantage and where we can build at a cost in a place and where we can't. Yeah, but actually, it actually is starting to look like that now, which is quite exciting. Cool. Oh yeah, this was a vessel like 25-pack water taxi bus that was launched recently in Barcelona. But at that point, incredibly, it's using about 20% of the energy of a boat of the same size and weight. I was driving there, so that's a worry. No. Well, look, a little bit of a thing, but thank you so much, guys. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. I think we're all on the crest of a wave after that presentation. We're now going to talk about expanding productivity in the digital age. We're going to explore how digitalization is transforming productivity, and we're going to share best practice for fostering a digitally adept workforce and economy around the world. Speaking of around the world, our next panel transcends an 11-hour time zone, from Belfast to Saudi Arabia to Kazakhstan to Sydney, who are currently 11 hours ahead. Now, leading and moderating this panel discussion from Malaysia is Rushdie Abdul Rahim, President and Chief Executive Officer at the Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology, MIGHT, otherwise known as MIGHT. Rushdie will introduce each panelist in a little more detail, but join me in welcoming to the stage our panel. First of all, we're going to have Mr. Eldar Abdrazakov, founder and CEO of the Centris Group. We're also going to have Dr. Ghada Aldaba, head of the Omnipreneurship Lab at the Aldaba Group. We have Dr. Adrian Johnson. He didn't have quite as far to travel, the Belfast Innovation Commissioner at Belfast City Council, just down the road at the City Hall. Dr. David Jordan, lecturer in economics here at Queen's University, and Mr. James Siolis, the CEO of Netlinks. Please welcome Rushdie and our panel.
Thank you very much. So let's start the ball rolling. Well, when I received the title of this to talk about productivity frontiers in the digital age, the question I asked to myself was, we've been talking about this for more than 20 years. So what's new? And that is the challenge I pose to the panelists with regards to, what new things can we bring to the table to talk about productivity frontiers in the digital age. Now, I won't waste time because we're short of time. I see the clock is running. So let's start with the roles amongst the tongue, which is Dr. Ghada. I'm going to give each of the panelists, I think, 1 or 2 minutes with regards to initial thoughts about the topic. Then we'll take it from there in terms of conversational. Dr. Ghada, please, your initial thoughts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rushdie, and thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. At Aldaba Holding, ADG stands as a global family business conglomerate encompassing more than 190 legal entities across 60 countries around the world. As strategic architects to our diverse portfolio of subsidiaries, we navigate the complexities of various industries, each with distinct maturity levels and organizational scales. This unique positioning enables ADG to provide strategic guidance while acknowledging the individual characteristics and needs of each company within our ecosystem. Research from MIT highlights critical challenge in the transformation landscape. 70 to 90% of digital transformation initiatives fail. The striking statistic stems from 2 primary factors: inadequate change management practices and what they term the fashionista approach. Organizations often pursue the latest digital trends without establishing the fundamental organizational changes and cultural shifts necessary for sustainable transformation. The MIT Digital Maturity Framework illuminates this challenge by identifying 4 distinct organizational stages: beginners, fashionistas, conservatives, and digiratis, classified according to their digital capabilities and transformation management sophistication. This framework validates ADG's deliberate transformation-first strategy, which emphasizes coordinated governance, comprehensive change management, and strategic vision over isolated digital initiatives. By taking this holistic approach, we ensure the transformation efforts are both sustainable and align with each subsidiary's unique context and objectives, while actively addressing the human element that are crucial for successful transformation. At El-Dabbagh, we are committed to transformation-first mindset, anchored in the 4 C's: commitment from leadership, cross-functional communications, capability building, and effective change management. Our methodology aligns with the Carter change management principles, particularly the creation of urgency, coalition building, and generating short-term wins. These steps are essential in maintaining momentum and overcoming common transformation challenges.
Okay, Dr. Gada, if I may, I'll stop you there. We'll continue a bit. But now I'll just go to our representative from the host city. Adrian, you just came back from Barcelona, and you're talking about Smart City Expo, and what can you bring back from Barcelona, and what can you give back to us with regards to what's new in terms of digital and productivity with regards to that?
Thank you, Dr. Rushdie. Yeah, I just came back from Barcelona last week at the Smart City Expo World Congress. And your question was, what has changed? And in typical Northern Ireland fashion, I would say quite a lot, but not a lot in some instances. So I spent 20 years in industry, predominantly around high-value manufacturing and automation systems. So sensorization of factory, collecting data, and then utilizing AI in terms of real-time data. And I did that for Seagate Technologies, who many people might know as a storage provider located here in Northern Ireland. And when I think about the journey 20 years ago that we started on that, it was very relevant to digital transformation for cities, for SMEs that we have here within Belfast and Northern Ireland, and large corporates. And it really came down to providing the right skills, providing the right confidence because of the accessibility that cities or companies get to technology and knowledge, and ultimately the collaboration that they have within that ecosystem. And what has changed considerably within Belfast, and I think James and I were just talking about this earlier, the huge transformation that's happened in Belfast. My role with Innovation City Belfast actually was established by the main innovation actors here within the city. So Queen's University, Ulster University, Belfast City Council, Belfast Metropolitan College, the Belfast Harbour Catalyst, which is an innovation incubator, and also then Invest Northern Ireland, which is our economic development agency here within Northern Ireland. So we've pulled all of those resources collectively together to provide that confidence, the skills, the investment, the policy that's needed within our civic partners and with the Northern Ireland Executive and the Department of the Economy to be able to drive digitisation both at a city, a citizen and a company level.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, let's go to Eldar. He established his group early in the year 2000s, and through my conversation with him, I assume that digital transformation is already part of the establishment of the group. But he said otherwise. So can you elaborate, and how does this bring a new thing to the table with regards to our conversation today?
Yeah, certainly. Rushdie, when we discussed, we were not born digital native, but we have to transform ourselves, and that is the journey. And I'll just bring the example of what is happening in Kazakhstan, because we have the vision on the digital side, but we need to convert it into actions. And what we see on digital 1.0, we consider that is the enabler of the processes. And we saw in Kazakhstan that enabling this digital transformation, we need e-government. We were successful in transforming fintech, smart city, and now it's LLM, large language models, and it's integration API first. That is all enables all the digital side. But now from the transactional nature of the digitalization, we need to pass more to holistic view and then to contextual in digital. Now we're in the second stage. One is actually, we're empowering. When we're talking empowering, that is more how to change the regulations, how to bring in new roles, how actually to integrate all of that. That is here we face another problem, which is what you discussed, the black elephants, and it's, number one, it's the institutional inertia. That is the biggest elephant in the room, and they were fighting with that to go to the next stage, which is embeddedness. And then to embed all this into the processes, and we clearly see the businesses then should think differently, should think in terms of the value streams, use cases, how is actually to plug in, how is actually to integrate, how is actually to make it more contextual, because the consumers do not recognize. They don't want just to go to financial services or something. They would like to have the jobs to be done. How is actually to execute these jobs? That is the critical stage. And that is the next stage, which is we're facing here in Kazakhstan.
Okay. So since Elda was already mentioning with regards to their organization and Kazakhstan as a whole, as a country as a whole, now I'll go to our resident economist and lecturer. Now, the assumptions of digital tech is actually, it is transformative or beneficial. But I'm sure you can't make it a case as one size fits all, isn't it? Because there are certain sectors will benefit more than the others. So I'd like just to have your thoughts on this, please.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Rushdie. In terms of sectors, how they use new technology will vary a lot. If we think particularly of manufacturing industries, there are ways that they'll be using new AI technologies in their production processes that simply isn't so relevant for a service industry, for example. And these aspects particularly are important for countries and regions whenever they're thinking about how do we take advantage of the new opportunities from digital technology. Each region or country will have its own industrial structure, will have its own existing strengths, but how they actually integrate this new technology into that business ecosystem is very important. And there are sort of three main important areas that sort of industries need to consider. One is infrastructure, having the actual infrastructure there to support the new digital technologies, whether that be to do with internet access or to do with new technology and machinery. Next one is skills, so making sure the workforce has the right skills and is adaptable to make use of these new opportunities. And the third one is around the adoption and adoption itself, having the capacity there to take advantage of these new opportunities beyond simply having the individuals or the infrastructure, so how those are brought together. And those are what really will determine the success for different countries and different regions as well.
Thank you for that. James, we had a brief chat over coffee this morning with regards to data security, especially with regards to the digital age. I was making a remark to him with regards to, in Malaysia, we are having this national ID now, conversation about the national ID. Now, people are apprehensive about giving up their data for the national digital ID, but willingly giving up their data to Facebook, Meta, Twitter, and there's a matter of trust with regards to this. Can you take this up and talk to us about this?
Thank you for that. I think the biggest challenge in this whole next frontier that's coming is data and the quality of data, privacy of data. Then you overlay that with cybersecurity as well. And I think that's the biggest threat to the productivity gains, if you like. I think from an individual standpoint, I think people just like to give their data thinking they'll get something for it. In Facebook, it's a community, therefore the more data I give, the more interaction I'll get, the more I'll learn about people. You then overlay that to the next level for enterprise. They want that data to analyse. For me, AI is coming into the fore now. AI is an application that will be added above that. We'll analyse that data. I think the key here is that people are educated about their own data and that they own their own data. And I think you'll see more and more discussion about data sovereignty, as you're seeing in Europe, you're seeing it in the US, you're seeing it in Australia, all around the world. But I think the biggest thing in terms of that productivity gain is how to actually store the data, analyse the data, and be able to make something of that data. And I think AI and machine learning will help us a lot with that. But there are also the challenges that you just mentioned. You know, for example, accessibility to the internet. You've got a whole bunch of challenges to make sure that that frontier, that push into new productivity is accessible to all, not just to big companies or enterprises, but also SMEs. You know, we heard that there's been a lot of failure with a lot of this stuff because I think the companies go into it under-resourced or not having an objective. So that's my comment, if you like.
Well, taking you up on that, I'll go back to Adrian. You're halfway through the Belfast Urban Innovation Framework, isn't it? 2022 to 2026. Now, what has been successful, what has been the most challenging so far with regards to, do you care to cite any case examples with regards to how does this bring productivity, digital tech and productivity into Belfast?
Yeah, I suppose just to follow on James's point around having the right infrastructure and having the right connectivity. One of the big changes that we're seeing in Belfast at the moment is the Belfast Region City deal, which is a £1 billion investment, which will come in over the next decade, at 5 centres of research excellence that exist across our academic institutions, ranging from everything from stratified medicine, One Health, through to virtual production, creative industries. But underpinning all of that is the connectivity. And one really big example in that is the implementation of 5G. So for private sector 5G investment, there needs to be a business case for that. But unfortunately, Northern Ireland's not at the scale at the moment to attract that level of investment. So one of the projects that the Belfast Region City Lead Partners have done is implement a 5G programme, which will not only stimulate the investment within private sector partners, but also Belfast Region City Deal partners, but also look at the use cases that are going to actually be applicable to citizens, because a big part of our investment is ensuring inclusive growth. And I think I listened to a couple of panels this morning. One of the worlds that I come from as well, I'm 30 years in the community and voluntary sector, which is probably one of the strongest sectors that we have in Northern Ireland. But having very human-centric, citizen-centric application into those and giving them connectivity to be able to engage with the solutions and technology is vitally important. If you look at, say, the 5G investments, some of the areas that we've invested, I think I saw Sam Turner earlier. One of the Research Centre of Excellence is £95 million in Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Centre. And one of the areas that they're looking to use 5G is around building information modelling within the centre itself, but also using augmented reality, virtual reality for developing of construction of that facility itself. I'm sure everybody has heard multiple times this week that Game of Thrones was filmed here in Belfast. But off the back of that has been a significant investment in virtual production studios in the creative industries led by Ulster University. And that's going to be a £72 million facility, which is being developed. And some of the ways that 5G are being used there is 5G in a box, which will allow end-to-end production for producers who are maybe filming in remote locations, the ability to transfer that data back to a production facility and do pre-processing and post-processing of that content. So the 5G then allows us also to get the likes of TransLink, who are our transport body here in Northern Ireland, of how they can use 5G technologies to look at operational planning and ensuring that there's mobility solutions in place there for maybe rural communities or citizens or underrepresented communities who are disengaged from urban settings and opportunities. So that has been a huge success. Those investments and projects are happening at the moment. We're also looking at 5G in the Belfast Harbour Estate for autonomous vehicles and testing autonomous vehicles with the support of Belfast Harbour. And off the back of that and the success of those early pilots, we're looking at potentially putting an additional $5 million into 5G programs next year to look at engaging more SMEs, more citizen-centric and human-centric solutions into that space.
Thank you. Well, let's go back to you, Dr. Gada. The conversation with regards to when we had the first day with regards to everybody has a different starting point. Now, the fact that Saudi Arabia has 100% internet penetration, so there's no issue with that. Now, do to us, continue on your line of conversation with regards to, you have this Vision 2030, what Al-Dabah Group is going to be, and how does this digital tech support that vision as well as the broader context of Saudi Arabia, because you're operating there. Please, by all means.
Actually, in terms of ambition, we, according to a latest study, Saudi Arabia, China was first in terms of innovation and the ambition and adopting innovation, was second in the, globally. However, when it came to the actual implementation, we were in the top, the lagging 10%, meaning that we have the ambition. So up to, if we talk about management, up to M-3, they're fully aligned with the strategy and they have, a clear path. However, when it comes to from layer 3, downwards, there's a gap first and a misalignment. And as I said, what we're doing at ADG that is different, using the 4C framework, is that when we initiate any initiative, we try to first, of course, align it with the strategy, and that's through the use of architectural governance. And architectural governance is basically the cornerstone at ADG. And this basically ensures the adherence to rigorous standards in business needs and data integrity and technology requirements. As an example, I can give you an example that, for example, that we had a project, and of course we manage hundreds of projects through this central platform. And so we had a project that for supply chain, and we managed through architectural governance, again, aligning with the strategy and latest technologies and so on and so forth, we managed to reduce 20% of the cost, in resource allocation. And another thing that we also depend on heavily is capability building, because the output, the deliverables from the universities, they don't necessarily match the needs of the workplace. And this is, globally, this is not specific to Saudi Arabia, but we've created the Omnipreneurship Academy that basically builds capability within the organizations, from different, whether it's business feasibility study or AI capabilities. So there's a range of courses or training that's specifically geared towards the specific roles our colleagues take. Another important aspect is change management. Again, change management, basically, how can we ensure that the message, the vision, the strategy ripples down to the lowest layer where it matters. And this is an ongoing, of course, this is a journey, and it's ongoing activities. But what's important is that we make, our message, we include everybody in the corporation so that we're all on the same boat heading towards the same direction.
Okay, I'm going to you, Elda, back to you. Now, I know that you have spent quite a number of time with regards to developing of digital tech, both internally for your organization as well as for Greater Kazakhstan. Now, in a company as big as yours, it's easy. But what about the SMEs? I think Dr. Gadang was also mentioning with regards to those things. How do you see them trying to reap the benefit of digital tech and trying to be part of this digital transformation and reap the benefit of this? How do you see the role of organization like yours, as well as what can government do or regional government do to actually support this, other than just giving up money, grants and things like that? Something new, business models.
Here when we approach the SME businesses, they certainly are not there. you may see that it's, their readiness to changes is low. Their readiness, I mean, in terms of the digital equipment they have, and it's very low and poor. And from that point of view, I think at a certain point someone should take the lead and to create this ecosystem. One is actually, it's first, as we mentioned, enabling, and it's when we're talking about enabling, that is creating the shelf solutions, applications, the certain capabilities which are available to smaller businesses, trying to integrate them to work together. That is the enabling side. Another side, when you look on the discussion, that is something like we have the approach when you market and there is a certain area, what we call non-consumption, which is coming from the smaller businesses. And here, what is important is first equip and then educate. When you cannot educate without not equipping. And from that point of view, you start with equipping, creating certain features, creating certain services, and providing to the businesses, and then you need to educate them. And combining all together, enabling, educating, and equipping, that is critical to engage the smaller business, especially in such a country like Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, we have the bigger businesses, but primarily in commodities industries. I mean, digital world, it's a bit, gives the marginal effect to their production. And we have the smaller businesses, which is not right, not there for the digitalization. And then we have the mid-sized companies, which are taking the leadership and the lead in terms of the digital, and then it's more transforming themselves, being more digital and integrating them into the ecosystem. That is the approach we see today.
Now, James, continuing from that, we talked about cybersecurity this morning, and we talked about, SMEs basically do not invest in cybersecurity. So how do we go about this? How do we tackle this issue?
I think that's where government gets involved and introduces, let's call it legislation coupled with requirements for product to have cybersecurity protocols built into it. So, the classic for us in our organisation is we work with SpaceX and build out IoT networks and connectivity in remote parts of the Philippines, South America, and other places like that. China, we did a few projects as well. Once you get the connectivity, that's just the first step. It's what follows that then allows you to leverage for that productivity gain. And the biggest problem for organisations is security. And, we talk about costs, which is a very good point. The next big issue, particularly if you want to get onto that productivity gain and introduce software layers to the internet access, is latency and performance. The first thing security does is affect your latency. So there's a serious challenge around this whole concept of cybersecurity, and it's going to create a haves and have-nots and how much you can actually gain in terms of those productivity advantages that you'll get. Because AI will become another software layer that will sit over the internet that organisations will exploit. Like I think yesterday was a very good presentation in terms of the mechanics behind it, but the next level is to see that become software app, because then anyone can use it, right? Then you've got to be educated on how to exploit that. But to get to that level, to be able to take advantage of that, you have to have the right infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure today is still hardware, which is challenging for a lot of small organisations because of cost. And that's a real problem. Software can solve that, but that's education. And so I think that's the major challenge for organisations.
I know Adrian is dying to add to that conversation, but before that, I'll just like to go to David. Pre-COVID, I think I've mentioned this to you. Pre-COVID, the TFP for countries represented here is less than 0.02 difference. So hypothetically, I'm thinking that, digital tech is actually the great equalizer. But talking about cost just now, moving forward with the advent of AI, the investment that's required, it will become the great divider rather than equalizer. So what are your thoughts behind that? And then Adrian, you can straight away continue and give your thoughts about that. Then how can we finance this investment to make sure that nobody is left behind?
Yes, so before COVID, we did see quite an equalisation in terms of the total factor of productivity growth, and I think that reflected the fact that a lot of the new technologies we were seeing had reached some kind of maturity in some way, and a lot of what was happening was convergence. A lot of economies could see how things have been adopted and they're able to replicate that. But then we've gone through COVID, which was very much a disruption for how businesses operate, and some performed really well and realised how they needed to adapt and pick the new technologies that suited their business. But there are others that maybe got left behind. One of the issues with that is around management within businesses, and there's been evidence that globally management practices do vary across countries. So one of the reasons we may see differences is that businesses are managed differently. But another aspect is whenever we have this disruption, it suddenly exposes maybe aspects of the underlying infrastructure or the supply side of the economy we didn't know there was an issue. But suddenly with this new change of direction, it shows that actually businesses don't necessarily have the right foundations in some areas, and therefore that's where government particularly can help. So I think we'll see things start to converge again, but it's sort of trying to get past those immediate barriers to productivity growth whenever we have this sort of disruption that takes place.
Adrian?
Yes, so thanks for noticing, Dr. Rusty, but Northern Ireland predominantly is an SME-based economy. So we have faced that problem of how do you get companies across various different sectors to digitally transform, and it's exactly where government steps in. So what we're trying to do here collectively is increase the level of private sector investment in research and innovation. But when you look at national programs in the UK, some of those can be quite inaccessible to small businesses here in Northern Ireland. And there are probably two initiatives that I would highlight of real importance that the Department of the Economy and the Belfast Region City Deal partners have developed. One is the AI Collaboration Centre, which very much is about providing that expertise and knowledge to small businesses who are really dipping their toe in the water with the application of AI. Like, businesses know the problem, they just don't know how to solution that space and don't always have that knowledge. So the AI Collaboration Centre gives free resources from the expertise that exists in Queen's and Ulster, the two universities here, to be able to identify how they might solve that problem and ultimately start getting themselves on that investment internally into data science, data strategies, infrastructure that they need. The other one, I think Ian Percy was on the stage before us around the UK Digital Twin Centre, which is going to be located here within Belfast. And it's a £38 million investment, but was initially stimulated by the investment from local government here in the Belfast Region City Deal partners. But that leveraged additional support and finance from UK government to open up a national digital twin centre, utilising the capabilities that exist here within Queen's around cybersecurity and wireless technology and future networks, the combined capabilities around AI and data within Queen's and Ulster, and the infrastructure that needs to be accessible. So when we look at Artemis are one of the founding partners of that project with an industrial solution. We see that they've got simulation capabilities. That's one part of the digital technology stack that we talked about for complex digital twinning. But providing that digital stack from the investment allows small businesses to get access to multi-million-pound infrastructure and capabilities that they just could not access without that. And that's came through the investments of local government here in Northern Ireland supporting that from the ground up.
How about you, James? You've operated in multiple countries. Do you see the same business model being implemented in other countries that you operate in?
I think the challenges that we're talking about are universal. It's not, I think every country has the haves and have-nots, so to speak. The biggest challenge, I think, for everyone is the SME sector, which globally is the largest employer, if you aggregate it. It's a question of how they are assisted in taking advantage of what's happening. And I think that's where government has to take a role. I think, what Adrian's doing in particular here in Belfast is very impressive. The Chinese did it in 2018 when they promoted cloud, and cloud became accessible to all organisations. The government went out of its way to promote it. And being China, obviously, it can get driven in a particular way because of the structure, the political structure there. But I think you need to see the same sort of leadership in the West, which you saw in China, for example, where the universal decision was everyone's going to cloud, because that's the first step in unlocking value for enterprise.
So let's talk about both of you. you come from a big group, an organization. How do you contribute back with regards to, you know, getting all this, because getting nobody left behind, the idea is getting everybody to reap the benefit of productivity from this digital tech. Any points that you would like to add with regards to that?
Sure. One of our organizations is called Philanthropy University, and it's based in Silicon Valley. And it provides training from Berkeley University, courses from Berkeley University. And the objective is basically all around the world, you know, there's NGOs, nonprofit organizations, and these nonprofit organizations, they they serve the community. And through the training we provide, rather than teach, you know, give someone money, we teach them how to fish. So through the NGOs, we provide the necessary training and courses so that we will enable, you know, different people around the world, okay, and build capability so that they become responsible for for themselves. So up to now, we've managed to reach and enable 200 million, people around the world. So this is one of the philanthropic arms, at ADG. So this is an example. And in terms of our community, we similarly, we have other activities, and as well as, of course, our colleagues at the organization.
Well, how about?
It's usually I joke that when the youngster required a certain education on digital, I usually joke that it's go and find the manual for the WhatsApp, how to use it, and it's usually, and with the younger generation, there is no problem. Especially today with the mobile devices and gadgets, they are more advanced than the structures we have, the governmental structures. They are lagging behind. And I would say here we're trying to catch up with the youngsters, primarily to make it in power and make it easier for the young people to use these gadgets, because we have the big gap of the global services, and the big tech companies today have the direct access to young generation, and they talk to each other directly. And then it's lacking, it's an impediment for this discussion that is primarily governmental and regulations. From that point of view, I would say the initiatives we do, it's usually, we create the different initiatives. One is actually what we consider, it's jealousy, it's the biggest driver of the progress. When you have you sponsor the events, we have the program and initiatives, what we call Professionalize Kazakhstan, and we have the different initiatives which is taken, and the people get engaged and they speak to each other, and it becomes viral. This viral effect, when you engage people and you create these more AI natives, one is actually you speak more, and we can see that today the enabler for this process in Kazakhstan, we need more English, because today it's education is available, it's no longer knowledge is there, you need just English language to understand and to have the direct access to knowledge. And that is we are considering different initiatives taken in the country to help this young generation to take over.
All right, we're almost at the end of our time. Now, this is the thing. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity, 30 seconds, to leave this stage so that people, when they go back, they'll remember, James says this, Eldar says this. So what are the key takeaways that you want to leave these people with? Start with you, James, at the end.
Thanks for that, Rishi. I think the takeaway for me when we talk about all this productivity is allowing everyone to exploit that opportunity. My personal interest is in making that accessible to everyone. And I think that's where we're all struggling. I think that would be my first point. I think that's gaining that access through the right infrastructure is the most important thing. The second thing then is to educate oneself on how to then exploit the advantages that brings. So you do get that productivity gain. And we've thrown a lot of buzzwords around AI, this, that, but really when it comes to productivity, innovation, the world now is very decentralized, and you see that through the universities providing resources to capture that innovation that's going on, to bring it back in-house to create the disciplines. But I think that's the other challenge that faces us in being able to recognise that you are onto something that's innovative and then bringing it back into a community to develop it properly, so then more people gain out of it and you get that exponential gain, if you like. So I think that'd be my two things that I would summarise.
I think for me, my main takeaway would be there is an opportunity for policy and for government to make a difference, but it's important to remember that ultimately government, whether it be regional or national, doesn't in itself create productivity. It's up to the businesses that are there to improve. So I think the main way that government can help and assist is by removing those barriers that may exist to productivity growth and giving those opportunities, particularly to business.
Yeah, I suppose for me, it's we want to accelerate that productivity growth, and I think in Belfast, Northern Ireland, we have that ecosystem that exists here. I think there's two things that are missing for me. One is a digital strategy for the region, which will not only address digital exclusion and looking at the right infrastructure and policy interventions, but will also bring regulators closer to the innovation process. So I'm sure our academic colleagues would all be frustrated with the amount of regulation that sits, especially when we see like the application of AI and things like medical devices. I think we need to bring regulators closer to that part of the process, and that'll drive some of that inclusivity, and it'll also drive the responsible applications of digital transformation and technologies that we've already talked about to ensure that people will be safe and ethically deployed within technologies globally.
For me, I think it's inclusion. I mean, research suggests that successful transformation requires the active engagement of at least 75% of the organization's workforce. So we strive to empower every team member at the ADG to become a transformation hero, ensuring our journey is supported at every level of the organization.
From me, we consider today that technologies are well ahead of the organizational needs and the challenges, and what we face and struggle that before becoming the data-driven, you have to become the insight-driven. And creating this learning organization is a big challenge, and that is something prohibits most of the companies to advance further. And from that point of view, creating the learning organizations, the next step is primarily insight-driven, because data that needs to fit for purpose.
Well, this fits into what I would say, what we practice in terms of enablers of everything. We call it FIRST. We talk about funding, F, we talk about infrastructure, I, we talk about regulations, standards, we talk about skills, talent, and of course, the enabling technology. Now, before I end, I'll just like to pinpoint with regards to this to Adrian. In Malaysia, Malaysians typically in average spend 44 hours a month in traffic. That shows our productivity. So part of the goals of Smart City was actually to ensure that we reduce this number. So, you know, that's it. So give a round of applause to our panelists. And with that, I thank you for listening.
Well done, Rushdie. Great job. Thank you to our panel from 5 different time zones. Fantastic. It is nearly lunchtime, but there's no better time than just before lunch to have something to digest on from Brian McCall, Director of Cubis. As many people in this room will know, Cubis is the commercial arm of Queen's University Belfast. Brian is going to give us an overview on Incubate, a university-wide network that fosters innovation and supports student and graduate startups. Please welcome Brian McCall. Brian.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying for this session. So I'm Brian McCall. I'm Director of Innovation at the University, but also CEO of Cubis, which is the commercial and investment arm of Queen's. So very much involved in turning research into economic benefit. But this is a slightly separate subject. Traditionally, we've not been involved in graduate enterprise. It's really been about academic enterprise. And if you like, I'm a bit of a convert on this, on the importance of graduate enterprise. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to why we feel this is an important agenda. At the end of it, there's a 5-minute video, so I'm going to segue into a video. That will give you a little bit of a feeling of how this is an all-system, an all-university approach. It's not just QBIS, there's many partners in it. You'll see some of the participants and you'll see some of the mentors as well. And then at the end, and I'm hoping you'll get ready for this, there's going to be a QR code. We're going to show you some of the graduate entrepreneurs that we're working with, 6, and we have a little prize. We have £10,000 in terms of prize money, which you're going to get to vote on. And we're going to allow you to go and speak to the graduates in the marquee after that. So if you get your phones ready for that, we'd really welcome your input on that. So why is graduate enterprise, why have I sort of been a big convert in terms of the importance of this? For me, it sits within the ambition of Queen's University to be an entrepreneurial university. If you like, not just an entrepreneurial university, but one of the most entrepreneurial universities, even the most entrepreneurial university in the UK. And that's no mean feat. There's 2 universities in Northern Ireland, but the stock of universities in the whole of the UK runs to about 120 institutions. So to get to the head of that in terms of entrepreneurial ranking is quite a significant effort. And I'll come to whether I think we've got some data as to whether that's a realistic ambition on our part. But first of all, I'll address the why. Why would we want to do that? Why do we feel that a university needs to play this entrepreneurial role? And for me, it starts the context that we work in. We work in an economy that is relatively challenged. We work in an economy that is low in terms of startup activity. You've heard before, this is an SME economy, but in terms of startup activity, it's relatively low, particularly in terms of deep tech startup activity. We are one of the lowest equity market regions in the UK, in fact, probably bump around 12 out of 12 regions. And so the role that the university plays is disproportionately important in both of those regards. In both of those, the contribution that we make in terms of the stock of startups and the investment activity, Queen's through QBIS is the 3rd most active early stage investor in Northern Ireland. We're disproportionately important because of that economic context that we work in. And of course, startups tend to be, particularly deep tech startups, tend to be more productive. The research points to the fact that they have greater high growth potential. And that's obviously a significant agenda with the programme for government. So that's another important reason that we think this plays into that. And underpinning all of that is the urge to change the culture so that not everybody sees traditional employment as the natural way to go for graduates, but a greater importance on enterprise within the culture. So is that a realistic ambition to be one of the most entrepreneurial universities in the UK? I think it is, and there's various different data points. This is a little bit like world titles for boxing. You'll pick your belt, and you might have favourites, but this belt for me is important because if you can see it, it's a ranking of all the universities in the UK based on over a decade's worth of data. And that data is essentially boils down to the efficiency of that institution, that university, in turning inputs into economic outputs. So for every pound that is given to Queen's University, what does it generate in terms of economic outputs? And it's a particularly tough measure because it's basically driven mainly by the return to investors in the spin-outs that we create. But that's a tight metric or proxy for value that we create. And you can see 2019, Queen's caused a bit of a kerfuffle because we bested the likes of Oxford's and Cambridge into 1st place. Do remember it's a measure of efficiency rather than size. And we did likewise in 2020. You'll note, if you keep those with keen eyes, we've dropped a place down to 2nd most entrepreneurial. They delayed the publication of that for a year or so. My suspicion is they wanted to give somebody a run at changing the rankings. We will try and get that back. But this is a measure of the efficiency of input into Queen's University and the impact we have on the local economy. So that's a foundation. That, for me, in my view, is a strong basis on which to claim that we are an entrepreneurial university. But of course, that's in one dimension. That is in spin-outs, research. We are a research university. The impact that has, I think, is quite significant. Some other metrics, if you look at some of the Bohurst data who measure all this activity across the UK, it's evident that of all the deep tech startups in Northern Ireland over the last 5 years, the vast majority, over 50%, came out of Queen's Cubis. So in terms of addressing that deficit of low tech startup ventures, it's really very important. But again, it's spin-outs. And the point I wanted to make is, academic enterprise is only part of the equation. This is the intro to why graduate enterprise. And as you'll see, that really is an important. I'll throw up some stats in a minute as to why I think graduate enterprise will be a key second lever for contribution to local economy. But as well as being a research university, obviously we're a teaching institution. And so you'll see some of this in the video. In our view, to give the best learning experience, the best pedagogic experience, we have to give the tools, the enterprise tools that our students need. That's irrespective of whether they want to go on, start their own startup, whether they want to go into traditional employment. These are the sorts of skill sets that will be increasingly important in the new economy. So there's a double benefit in terms of that. And of course, no better place to start if we're looking to change the culture in Northern Ireland and shift it in terms of a more pro-innovation, more enterprise economy. No better place to start with the bright young things coming out of both universities. So here's a little bit of data. This is the data for the whole of the UK in terms of turnover and the contribution. You'll see the yellow line is growing in significance in terms of the contribution of graduate startups, still significantly outperformed by spin-out activity, academic enterprise. But I think, this is a global conference, and if we look to the US, you'll find that the relationship is completely inverse. Most of the value is created by graduate startups. Obviously, there's more graduates than there are academics, and I think that's a measure of the potential that we have, where we can go in terms of raising that bar in terms of the contribution of graduate enterprise to the local economy. So that's the turnover. You can see it also in the stats around employment, much more significant. So graduate enterprise produces more jobs. This is the national picture. I'm not sure it quite plays out like this in Northern Ireland, but you can see how significant that is. Now, of course, there's obviously potentially a tension between the number of jobs you create and productivity. And so, this isn't necessarily the full story and a good picture. If I were to dig into this data, have done that, the yellow line in terms of investment wouldn't even register. So there's something about the quality of those enterprises that we're creating that isn't quite getting the support and the growth and the scale that it needs. And this is, I think, where Incubate potentially comes in and would allow us. Not all of those businesses are going to be high-growth tech businesses. Many will be lifestyle businesses. There's nothing wrong with that. Creates jobs and employment. But I think we are missing a trick in terms of, as I say here, integrating graduate enterprise efforts into our investment ecosystem. We're also missing a trick in terms of using our alumni base to provide mentorship, and one of the ways that we're trying to really address this is by running programs such as Quest, which are customer discovery programs. You might, if you like, it's true to say that some of our graduates might not have had very long careers naturally in terms of industry. And so exposing them to the market to check that what they're planning to do before they start their startups actually addresses a need in the marketplace is pretty critical. So in summary, whether you want to start your own business or you want to be a better employee, this is what we're trying to equip people with. So I'm going to run the video so you can get a little sense of some of the participants in there. But what I would say, this is very much about connection. It's about moving away from the competitions. There's a role for business planning competitions. There's a role for pitch competitions, etc. In my view, the worst case scenario is that graduates pitch well, get badges, put them on their CV. There's no support when they graduate, and actually they're forced to go into paid employment. And so finding some program that is able to support graduates after they leave the university is all part of what Incubate
is about. I'll just go into the video. And
Incubate is an exciting new initiative that draws on expertise within different departments of Queen's University Belfast to build a network that supports student innovation and enterprise. The university has a strong history of taking excellent research and translating it into real-world impact, and of supporting student startups as they take their first steps. Now we are building on that expertise to create a student experience that will enable our students to develop an entrepreneurial mindset and the skills required to tackle 21st century challenges. We have created a network made up of alumni engagement, education and student services, SU Enterprise, Queen's Business School, the Graduate School and Cubis, all working together to support students and graduates to become more entrepreneurial.
It's increasingly clear that in an unpredictable world that employers are looking for students that have the ability to innovate and deal with uncertainty, to be agile in the workplace. So irrespective of whether students become entrepreneurs, these are the skill sets that we know that they will need. So it's a very system-wide approach from the university, embedding this in the curriculum, making sure that there are multiple pathways for students either to become better employees or to start their own businesses, and making sure that that registers and makes a dent in the local economy for the positive. So that's why we're such supporters of Incubate as an overall framework, in particular the money that we're putting into the Quest programme.
We recognise that there is strength in combining both the skills and expertise from a range of people and departments from across the university. And we believe that together we can offer the best service to support students to achieve their dreams. We support students in gaining the skills, knowledge and contacts to help them start, grow or launch their own business. Many students don't necessarily see themselves as an entrepreneur. They may have a side hustle or working on something as part of an entrepreneurial module, but they don't necessarily see themselves as a business person or an entrepreneur. So it's our job to try and help them realise their potential, to think about this as a future career. We have seen time and time again business ideas flourish into successful startups with the right advice, the right support, a little bit of funding and some self-belief.
So the graduate school is very much focused on offering a complementary service to SU Enterprise, so they are focused on helping postgraduate students to develop entrepreneurial skills through programmes, workshops and good conversations. So employers want problem solvers, they want creativity, they want calculated risk takers. They want students who can basically come in and know how business works, and getting that entrepreneurial experience is vital for any student, regardless of whether they want to start a business or whether they want to work for an employer.
I'm here today. I'm part of the Quest program and it has been an amazing experience. I've had access to mentors, funding, I've had access to alumni who are now successful business individuals at the moment, and I've also have a community of fellow entrepreneurs, which is inspiring and motivating, and the program helps you form a sense of community, which is something I've never had before.
So for me is I came into this not really having any background in business, so having the training days were so beneficial for me because it gave me an insight to the background of business, like creating your business plan, making assumptions, and from that it just helped you grow step by step within the Quest journey. From that I got a business advisor who has been absolutely amazing, and that was from Quest. And that helped me open so many doors, learn more things, see what I need to do to set up a successful business.
What I've discovered over this is that I went into it with doubts and have come out of it with none. I validated a lot of my assumptions and a lot of the things that I was worried about. I have essentially learned, oh, hang on a second, there really is, there's a place for this in the market and it could really make it. And I've been nothing but encouraged to go forward, and the resources and the people that this program has put me in touch with or pointed me in the direction of are setting me on that path even faster than I even anticipated.
It's really important to reach out many customers before you finalize your product, because you must see the potential in the market. It can be a service, it can be a product, but at first finding out your customers, reaching out them in a better way is really important.
There's a lot of people that are very knowledgeable that are willing to help you or put you into contact with the people that can help you better.
The earlier you get started, the earlier you start to think about business and
the sort of support that Queen's are trying to put around them, giving them competitions where they can earn some seed money, exposing them to other people with experience and knowledge, introducing them to mentors. All those things are really valuable, and I'm really pleased that Queen's are taking this initiative.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of flavour of how system-wide the programme is, the benefit of the mentors and exposure to the market. These are the 6 aspiring entrepreneurs who are trying to get some support through your vote. So here's the QR code. I'm going to leave this up with you. They are all, they've set up stalls in the marquee. So over lunch, we'd really welcome if you would go and talk to them. It tracks back to that connection rather than this just being a competition. They'll gain massively from your insights. And if anybody's interested in supporting students through this program, we'd love to hear from you. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Brian. Thank you very much indeed. The future is bright. The future is lunch. Before I tell you exactly where we're going to find lunch, let me thank all of our sponsors and our partners who made today possible. They're all listed on your conference brochure, including NIE and Accenture. We couldn't have this event without you, so thank you. Folks, lunch, it's where you came in. It's not at the South Downing Hall where we got our lovely scones at half-time there. It's back out in the quad, the marquee, just where you came in. There are wayfinders who will help you there. And if possible, could we be back here for 1 o'clock? For 1 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed.